Chapter 1 of Prisoner of the Mill. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Prisoner of the Mill by Harry Hazelton. Chapter 1. Brother and Sister. Forebodings. Nettleton. War. Oh, how much of misery is expressed in that one word. It tells its own tale of woe, of blood, of broken hearts and desolated homes, of hopes blighted, of poverty and crime, of plunder, peculation, and official tyranny, of murder and sudden death. In short, it develops all the baser passions of the human heart, changing a peaceful world to a world of woe, over which the destroying angel well might weep. Come, O thou angel, peace! The Army of the Mississippi, as it was termed, had been unsuccessful in their pursuit of the rebel General Price. A portion of it, or rather the division commanded by General Sigel, had advanced from Springfield, Missouri, upon the Wilson Creek Road, as far as the famous battleground rendered immortal by the death of General Lyon, but finding no enemy, it had encamped upon Grand Prairie, a few miles to the west of the bloody field. All in camp was upon the tiptoe of expectation. The lovely scene spread out before the view was sufficient to inspire the heart of man to great and glorious deeds. The broad, rolling prairie lay there like heaven's great carpet. The long grass waved in the breeze, presenting the appearance of a deep green sea, undulating in low swells as if Queen Mab's wand were wafting over it. The autumn's frost had changed thousands of the delicate emerald blades to purple, yellow, and scarlet, while intermixed with these was the white prairie flower, lending to the scene an almost fairy-like aspect. The large Fremont tents were arranged in rows in a tasty manner. Flags were flying, bands were discoursing sweet strains which echoed far and wide. Squads of soldiers in vari-coloured uniforms were lounging lazily on the grass, while those detailed for mess or guard duty were busily prosecuting their assigned tasks. To the east of the camp appeared a wall of forest kings, their verdure also touched by the frost, presenting a variety of colours and glistening in the sunlight. Few in that small army had witnessed the horrors of the battlefield, but like all green troops, conceiving that there was much of romance connected with the deadly field, and that heroes were created by a single brave deed, the mass of Sigel's men were eager to meet the foe. It had been given out that the entire army was to join this division on the prairies, and that an advance was to be made at once against Price, who was then at Cassville, some 40 miles distant to the southward. "I think we can safely count upon a desperate battle by the day after tomorrow," exclaimed one of the party of 5, seated within a captain's tent, 4 of whom were at a table, with cups and wine before them. The 5th person was making himself generally useful, acting in the capacity of a servant. "You have fleshed your maiden sword at Springfield, and I did not suppose you would be anxious for another fight. I confess I cannot gaze upon such scenes without a shudder, and, if duty would permit, I would willingly sheathe my sword for ever." "Captain Hayward, you are low-spirited to-day," answered the first speaker. "I am indeed, Lieutenant Wells, and can you wonder? My sister is here." "I only wish mine was." "That is a rash wish, my friend. She would be exposed to much danger, and I never want mine to gaze upon a battlefield. No, where men cut each other's throats, delicate, sensitive women should not be near." "Could you find no way in which to send her from Springfield to St. Louis?" asked Wells. "I could have done so by the mail coach, but you know the entire distance of 130 miles from Springfield to Rolla, or to Tipton upon the other route, is infested with guerrillas, and I feared to send her. I preferred she should brave the dangers of the camp or even the battlefield with me." Captain Hayward bent his head upon his hands and was silent. It was some moments before anyone ventured to speak. All appeared to be oppressed with a strange sadness. At length one of the party, Captain Gilbert, slapping him familiarly upon the shoulder and endeavouring to speak gaily, said, Come, come, Harry, this won't do. You must shake off every vestige of blues. You are suffering still from the wound you received in the Warsaw skirmish, and it makes you low-spirited. No doubt your sister will be perfectly safe, and I know she had much rather be with you, to assist you should you need her aid, than to be safe in St. Louis, enduring the tortures of suspense." Hayward made no reply. At this moment a female, delicate and fair, came tripping lightly into the tent, her face wreathed in smiles, and her eyes sparkling with delight. But as she caught sight of Hayward, she paused and gazed upon him for a moment, exhibiting the most intense interest. Then advancing and placing her hand upon his shoulder, she spoke. "Brother!" Hayward started, and clasping her in his arms, he pressed her close to his heart for a moment. But gazing into his eyes, she asked, "What is the matter, dear Harry? You appear ill." The countenance of Hayward underwent an instant change, as he replied, "Not ill, but somewhat depressed in spirits, perhaps, in view of what a day may bring forth." "Oh, Harry," she said, "I hear there is going to be another fight. Will you have to go into it and leave me?" "Should there be a battle, I shall endeavour to protect you, dear sister." "But you will be in danger, perhaps wounded, perhaps killed. Oh, what would I do then? Don't go, Harry." And the gentle girl threw her arms around her brother's neck and wept. After a moment he raised her, and pressing his lips to her forehead, said, "I wish to speak with these gentlemen a moment. Go to your friend Alibamo's tent. I will come for you soon." The sister cast back a look of fond solicitude, and left the tent. Hayward gazed after her a moment, muttering audibly, "Poor child, what would you do if I should fall?" "You would indeed be alone." "Now, Captain, I don't think that's half fair," exclaimed the one spoken of as being the servant. "Do you think I am such a darn skunk as to, if you was killed, not to fight for my captain's sister? The skunk? No, I mean if you die, if she, dummy, if I don't, I... And the speaker, as if unable to express what he did mean, suddenly left the tent. All present smiled broadly, and good humour was thus, for the moment, infused in all hearts. "Nettleton had a sudden call," said one. "He has gone to the sutler's for a dictionary," asked another. "His heart is in the right place," remarked Hayward. "That's so," responded all with emphasis. "You are safe, with such a darn skunk for your bodyguard, Captain Hayward," Gilbert declared with comic seriousness. William Nettleton was in height about 6 feet. His general appearance was very singular. His hair was nearly white, naturally so, his eyes of a light green and large, his carriage very loose. Indeed, when he walked, one would almost expect to see him fall in pieces. His feet were huge in dimensions. He had the appearance of a half-witted, illy formed person, but he was, withal, neither one nor the other. Having been detached from the company to which he belonged, to act as servant to Captain Hayward, he soon became so greatly attached and devoted to the captain as to be styled his bodyguard. This attachment was not fictitious, nor did it proceed from a spirit of military sycophancy or subserviency. It was felt Nettleton had evinced more than ordinary courage on several occasions, and had also displayed so much judgment with his intrepidity that he had received orders of advancement, but these he declined, preferring, as he expressed himself, to stay with my captain, the first what promoted me. It will also be well to explain the presence of ladies in the camp. Miss Mamie Hayward was the sister of Captain Hayward, who, having received intelligence that her brother was wounded, had visited Springfield for the purpose of ministering to his wants. At the time of her arrival, Fremont's Army of the Mississippi was marching upon that place, and the journey from Rolla or Tipton was safe. But soon those roads were infested with guerrillas, and as they were poorly guarded, it was not thought prudent that the ladies who had reached Springfield should attempt to return. Miss Hayward, therefore, remained with her brother. This same reason will apply to all the ladies in camp, for which there were several, conspicuous among whom was the wife of Adjutant Hinton, one of the officers of the well-known Benton Cadets. She was usually addressed as Alibamo, her name when a captive in Price's hands. She was very beautiful, and of that daring, determined nature which has immortalized so many women of the West. In company with Alibamo was a young lady who acted in the capacity of waiting-maid, but who really appeared more like a companion. This female possessed the not particularly euphonious name of Sally Long. "No, Wells, you informed me of your affection." "I must join with Nettleton in my reproaches, Captain Hayward," answered Lieutenant Wells in a subdued tone. "You forget my conversation with you last night." "No, Wells, you informed me of your affection for my sister, but you have never addressed her as a lover. How do you know that she will return your love? If she could return it, I confess, Lieutenant, I do not know any one to whom I would more willingly see her united. But if she cannot, how could you assume to become her protector? If such should be the case, and the fortunes of war should deprive her of a brother, rest assured that not only myself, but every man in camp would willingly shed his blood in her defence, and care for her as a sister." "Thank you. I do feel a foreboding of evil. I believe I shall be killed in the coming battle, and if this should be the case, I commend her to your care. But my nerves are excited. I will walk into the open air. No, I would be alone," he added, as one of the officers arose as if to accompany him. As he left the tent, one of the party, a Captain Walker, exclaimed, "Well, I hope things are all right, but I have my doubts." "Your doubts of what?" asked Wells. "Well, no matter. You are too directly interested to listen to the explanation, but perhaps you will find out some day. Do you intend, sir, to cast any slur upon Captain Hayward?" Captain Walker did not reply, but left the tent. An hour or more had passed, and Hayward did not return. It was now quite dark when suddenly the assembly was sounded, and, all anxious, the troops fell in. The order was read: "Pack knapsacks, and have everything in readiness for a move at daylight." All was excitement, and every preparation was made for a forward movement. But soon it began to be whispered that the orders were to return. In a short time it was officially announced that the movement was, in reality, back to Springfield, and from thence to Rolla and St. Louis. Many were the expressions of disappointment and regret, and some even ventured to denounce the policy. Fremont had been superseded in the field, and General Hunter, his successor, had abandoned the campaign, then on the very eve of its final consummation. End of Chapter 1. Chapter 2 of Prisoner of the Mill. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Prisoner of the Mill by Harry Hazelton. Chapter 2. The Tragedy of the Stream. Who was guilty? When Captain Hayward left the tent, he proceeded to the stream which skirted the woods. Bending over it, he bathed his fevered brow. Then he seated himself upon the bank of the river, and resting his head upon his hands, was for a long time absorbed in his thoughts. A human form flitted lightly past. Hayward raised his head and listened, but all was quiet again, and in the darkness of the night he could distinguish nothing. "I was mistaken," he said to himself. "If I was not, and a human being is around, I will wager it was Nettleton, who, anxious for my safety, has followed me." The captain was again silent for a moment, when the breaking of a twig betrayed the presence of some person. Hayward raised his head and called, "William? William Nettleton?" "Sir," answered a voice but a few feet from the captain. "Why did you follow me, William?" "'Cause I'm a darn skunk," drawled the person addressed, as he emerged out of the darkness. "And curse you!" The person speaking was before him. In an instant Hayward sprung to his feet, but with a cry of agony exclaimed, "Great God, Nettleton, why have you— Oh, God, save me! You've killed me! I die!" And falling heavily forward, the words died upon his tongue. The murderer bent over the murdered for a moment, then with some haste rolled the body into the water, and turned from the spot.
He paused under the shade of a tree and listened for the tread of a sentry, that he might enter the camp unobserved. With a half-suppressed laugh he uttered his thoughts. "I have done it, sure, and now that it is done, I must progress. No retreating now. I think I'll win. Goodbye, Captain, and give my respects to my friends as you float downstream." He proceeded with caution toward the camp, and was soon lost in the city of canvas. The tattoo soon sounded. Lights were extinguished, and all was quiet, save in a few tents, which appeared to be those of officers. Yet there were aching hearts within that camp, and, as the night progressed, many were the anxious inquiries as to why Captain Hayward did not return. In a large tent, near that occupied by Captain Hayward, were seated 3 ladies. One was Miss Hayward, another was Alabama, or, as she is now a wife, she should be called Mrs. Adjutant Hinton. The other was Miss Sally Long, the waiting-maid of Alabama. Before the tent paced a special guard. Beside it was a tent of much smaller dimensions occupied by Nettleton and his servant, Black George, or, as Nettleton used to call him, Swayze's nigger. "I fear something has befallen my brother. He does not return, and it is now 12 o'clock. "Don't be alarmed," said Alabama in a soothing voice. "Your brother is most likely at the headquarters of General Sigel. He may be detained on business. Come, let us retire." "No, not while my brother is absent." At this moment the guard came to the tent entrance and said, "Ladies, if you have not yet retired, Captain Walker requests the pleasure of a few words with Miss Hayward." "Oh, Alabama, I fear that man. He looks at me so strangely. But perhaps he brings news of my brother. I will see him. Bid the captain enter." As Walker entered, he appeared agitated, but controlling his emotions, he said, "Ladies, you will pray excuse me. I feel that I must speak now, as it may be my last opportunity. We, or I should say the army, will be separated at Springfield, and I shall see you no more." "Do you bring news of my brother?" asked Miss Hayward. "No, his disappearance is very strange, but I came to speak of myself." "What would you say?" "This, Miss Hayward. I have loved you long and dearly. Tomorrow we may be parted, and I would ask you, should the fortunes, or rather the misfortunes of war, deprive you of a brother's love and protection, will you not permit me to seek you out and become your future protector?" "Captain Walker, these words surprise me, and I think propriety demanded that they should have been spoken in the presence of my brother." "Pardon me, dear lady, I have waited until this hour for your brother's return, and at last, fearing I should have no other opportunity, I ventured to visit you now. You have a friend and sister in Alabama, and surely you will not fear to speak before her." "I cannot answer your question. It refers to the future." "Then, for the present, let me speak plainly, and I beg you will do the same. Can you not at least regard me now as your friend and protector, and give me a friend's privileges?" The timid girl turned towards Alabama, and in an inaudible voice spoke a word. "She answers promptly, 'No,'" replied Alabama, somewhat sterner than was her usual manner. "You love another, then?" asked Walker. Miss Hayward did not reply. "Is the favoured one Lieutenant Wells?" again asked Walker. "You are impertinent, Captain Walker," replied Alabama. "I must request you to retire. How can you thus, in her brother's absence, address her in this manner?" At this moment there was a commotion in the tent of Nettleton. The voice of a negro was heard, exclaiming, "I heard you, Massa Nettleton. There ain't no use in you denying it. I heard Massa Captain say, 'Oh, Nettleton, you kill me.' Oh, Lord, if ever I get out of dis scrape, you'll never catch this child in such another one." "Is the nigger crazy? What is the darn skunk talking about?" "Oh, you needn't make believe ignoramus in dis there question. I heard ye." Now look-a-here, you unconscionable dark. If you have got anything to say, spit it out. Don't make a darn skunk of yourself. Oh, won't I fetch you up in the morning? Yes, sir. Are you going to speak and say what you mean? Oh, golly, you go back on the captain that way? What captain? Out with it, or I'll break your head and every bone in your body, exclaimed Nettleton, in a state of undisguised excitement. Serve this nigger as ye did the captain, and then put his body in the river. The negro had scarcely uttered these words when Nettleton seized him. He set up a terrible howl, which brought Captain Walker to their tent. What is all this fuss about? Asked Walker. The negro went on to explain as follows. Why, ye see, Massa Captain, I went over to that yar house across the river to see Miss Julia, a cold gal that used to be my sweetheart. Well, I see the Johnnies comin', and I ran down to the river and come on this side, but they come so close to me that this child hid behind a big log. Then they stop right by me and say, Golly, we can't catch nobody. Then I heard someone on the other side of the river say, Oh, Nettleton, you— Silence this stuff, you have been drunk. If you speak upon this subject again, I'll cut your black throat. I sit dumb, Massa Captain. Quiet had now been restored, and all parties retired for the few hours that intervened before morning. But it was evident all were not asleep. Several times a stealthy step was heard, and a shadow flitted past the white canvas tent, dimly seen by the pale starlight. Morning came at last, and all was astir. Captain Hayward had not yet returned. An inquiry was made if anyone had seen him. I have not seen him since last evening at twilight, replied Walker, at which time he acted very strangely, and talked about the injustice of war. I'm inclined to think he has deserted and joined the enemy. Oh, you darn skunk, yelled Nettleton, as he sprang forward and was about to strike the speaker. But, checking himself, he added, It's well you wear them gilt things on your shoulders, or I'd teach you to call my captain such names. If you would save yourself trouble, you had better remain quiet, Nettleton, replied Walker, as he fixed his eyes significantly upon him. I knows where Captain Hayward am, said the negro, stepping forward. Where is he? Sobbed Miss Hayward, pressing forward in her eagerness. He is— Silence! Yelled Walker. Let him speak, said the colonel. Go on, George. Where is the captain? Down dar. The negro trembled violently and glanced at Nettleton. What do you mean? He's in the river, killed dead, sure. A wild shriek rose upon the air as Miss Hayward fell back into the arms of Alibamo, insensible. By whom was he killed? By Massa Nettleton dar, sure. I heard across the river, just as plain as day. Nettleton started back in horror, his eyes extending widely and his frame trembling. A general murmur of disbelief ran through the crowd. Did you see him do the deed? Asked the colonel. Golly, I couldn't see much, it was so dark, but I hear Massa Captain say, Oh, Nettleton, you kill me. Golly, see how Massa Nettleton shake. Where was this? Right down by that tree. His blood is all over the ground, I just see it. In an instant, Nettleton had dashed off for the spot indicated. In accordance with an order from the colonel, he was pursued. Reaching the locality named, he gazed upon the ground. It was red with blood, fresh blood. He threw himself upon the earth and wept and moaned, and called upon his captain to return. His grief was terrible to behold. By this time the officers and many of the men had arrived. They gazed upon the grief-stricken servant with respect, and more than one expression of sympathy was heard. If Captain Hayward has been murdered, it was not by that boy. Nettleton loved his captain too much to harm him, said Lieutenant Wells. I am inclined to think the deed has been done by skulking guerrillas. I incline to your opinion, Lieutenant Wells, as to the innocence of Nettleton, but as to the deed having been done by guerrillas, It is not likely. It is much too near camp. But Hayward certainly had no enemy in our camp who would have done this deed. We do not know the secret motives which animate the human heart, replied Walker, in a tone and manner not devoid of meaning. Let instant search be made for the body, commanded the colonel. It was done, but no trace of it could be found, although the water was too shallow to have permitted it to float down the river. Attention was again directed to Nettleton, who was sitting erect, gazing at a piece of sharp, bloody steel which he held in his hand. Viewing it a moment, he sprung to his feet and fixed his eyes upon Lieutenant Wells. Then he turned to the colonel and handed him the blade. The officer examined it. Directing his gaze upon Lieutenant Wells, he asked, "Has anyone among you a small Spanish dirk with a highly polished and ornamented blade?" "I had such a one," replied Wells, "but I have missed it for several days." The colonel instantly turned toward the camp, commanding all to follow him. He halted before the tent of Lieutenant Wells and said, "You, Captain Walker, and you, Adjutant Hinton, enter this tent and tell me what you find." The search lasted but a moment, during which time Wells had been assisting Miss Hayward, but not without evincing much agitation. Walker now appeared, holding in his hand a bowl of bloody water, and exhibiting the broken stiletto, covered with blood, which had been found in the overcoat pocket of Wells. A shirt also was found, which was stained with blood. "What can you say to this damning proof of your guilt?" asked the colonel. "I know nothing of it." "Arrest the murderer of Captain Harry Hayward," demanded the colonel in a loud voice. The guards instantly seized him. "Murderer! He, a murderer, and of my brother? No, no! This is some dreadful dream. Oh, tell me my brother is not murdered. It will kill me. Oh, see, pity a friendless girl who kneels to you and begs you to tell her that you have not deprived her of a dear brother. Speak to me, Edward. I did love you, and you would not harm him." Wells could not speak. He had never spoken to Miss Hayward of his love for her, but now, in her delirium of her grief, she had confessed her love for him. Oh, what a moment! Walker advanced to raise Miss Hayward from her bended position before Wells. "Paws off, you darn skunk!" yelled Nettleton, as he hurled Walker to the ground. "I alone am her protector now." End of Chapter 2.
Chapter 3 of Prisoner of the Mill. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Diana Schmidt. Prisoner of the Mill by Harry HAZELTON. Chapter 3. The Proposal, the Interruption, the Indian, the Rescue, the Wounded Man, the Mystery. Near the village of Ozark, at the base of a ridge of mountains of that name, runs a most beautiful stream or river, which bears the name of the village, and is one of the tributaries of the North Fork of the Gasconade. Its banks are high, and covered with a thick but small growth of the scrub oak, peculiar to that portion of Missouri. The bed of the river sparkles with brilliant white and yellow pebbles, polished by the rush of waters for thousands of years. A fine bridge spans the stream along the main road, that runs through the only opening in the forest for miles around. After crossing this bridge, and ascending a sharp hill, the village of Ozark is reached. This consists of about 20 ordinary-looking dwellings, a courthouse, and a rough building, dignified by the name hotel. Beyond the village, and higher up the mountain, is a line of rolling hills, which overlook the country for miles around. On one of these, and near the edge of a grove, were to be seen a cluster of tents, and, from the number of horses picketed but a short distance away, It would at once be supposed from a distance to be a cavalry camp, with, perhaps, a section of artillery. On a sloping point, extending from the side of the bridge to the stream, and reclining upon the turf, were two persons. The one a young man of marked appearance, and the other a female of much beauty, though her dress bespoke her a native of that portion of the country. "Nettie, when do you expect your sister to return?" "It is difficult to answer, Charles, but I trust very soon." "Have you not heard from her recently?" "No, there is no way in which she can communicate with me. The mails have been discontinued, you are aware, from Rolla to Springfield. If you can visit the army, I presume you can both dispatch and receive letters. Are you not very anxious to learn how she is treated among the Federals?" "I am most anxious. Still, I have no fears." "I cannot feel as you do upon that subject. I will not awaken useless fears in your breast, but I have not so much confidence in their magnanimous natures." "Charles, you told me to-day for the first time that you loved me, and asked me if I could not address you as dear Charles. You have been very kind to me, and, on one occasion, you rescued me from the hands of a villain. I feel grateful, truly so. But whatever my feelings may be, I can never wed my country's enemy. Look yonder, you see that white cottage? Once it was beautifully adorned with creeping vines, and the lawn before it bloomed with flowers and shrubbery. But, dearer than all, within its walls lived my father and my sister. Look at it now. Its beauty has departed. It is a wreck. Father and sister have been driven from it, while I have been detained here by force. You profess to love me. If you do so, prove it. We are now more than a mile from the rebel camp, and you can escape with me to Springfield. I will assist you to escape. Indeed, I will accompany you a portion of the way to Springfield. But I must return to my own people and fight with them to the last. I do love you, and I would become your husband gladly if I could be satisfied you loved me for myself alone. But I cannot sacrifice one jot of honor or principle to win even you, dear Nettie." "And you will go with me now?" Yes. Stay, what is that? Do you not hear a low, moaning sound?" "I heard nothing." "Well, perhaps I am mistaken. But I fancied I heard a sound. No matter. I will go with you now to Springfield." "To what purpose, young man?" The speaker was a powerful person, and had emerged from the bridge just in time to hear the last sentence of Charles Campbell. "So, sir," he continued, "you would desert us, and join the Yankees, and all for your foolish regard for this vixen? Colonel Price, if you were not an officer, I would make you eat your words. I have served you faithfully, and you have no right to question my loyalty. I do not intend to desert. Neither is this lady a vixen any more than you are a coward." Price started, bit his lips, and frowned fiercely. At length he said, "Why did you propose visiting Springfield with this lady?" "I intended to accompany her a portion of the way, and then to return to my duty." "Why does she wish to visit Springfield?" "Because her father and sister are both in St. Louis, and she wishes to rejoin them." "Did not yonder cottage belong to her father?" "It did. He was one of the most bitter opposers in this section." "And you love his abolition daughter?" "I love his daughter, sir." "Enough. You will return to camp this moment. I will take charge of this young lady. When I rejoin you, I shall put your loyalty and your courage to the test. Do you see yonder boat?" He pointed up the river. A small boat was seen floating down the stream, in which 3 men were sitting erect, and the form of a 4th lying prostrate. How do you propose testing my loyalty, Colonel Price? That boat contains a Yankee officer. He is to be hung up by the neck. You shall perform the job. Is not that man wounded, Colonel Price? Yes, very badly so, I am informed. Then I will not perform the base thing you propose. Price drew a revolver, and pointing it to the head of Campbell, commanded him to start at once for camp. He had scarcely done so when a powerful Indian sprung from concealment and snatched the weapon from his hand. At the same time he seized Price as if he had been a child and hurled him into the water below. Without waiting to watch the result of this sudden immersion upon the chivalrous colonel, he caught the maiden in his arms and bounded off in the direction of Springfield. As he started, he beckoned to the young man and muttered, "Come, follow. Me save her." Price floundered about in the water for a moment and finally succeeded in reaching the shore just as the boat came up. "Come, quick, join me in the pursuit," yelled Price. The three men leaped upon the bank, and, at the command of Price, all discharged their pieces after the retreating Indian, but without effect. Pursuit was then ordered, but Price, observing that Campbell did not follow, turned and asked, "Are you not coming, sir?" "No," was the prompt reply. Price felt for his revolver, but finding it gone, he only muttered, "Curse you!" and then commenced the pursuit. For over a mile it was kept up. The pursuers gained upon the Indian, who was considerably obstructed in his flight by the weight of the female. At last Price exclaimed, "By the Eternal, there come the Yankees!" Sure enough, just appearing in view upon an elevated point a little beyond, was seen a squadron of cavalry and a section of flying artillery rapidly advancing. "To the hill! Give the signal for our guns! To the bridge! Secure the prisoner in the boat!" These commands were given by Price as he commenced a rapid retreat toward the bridge. Pausing on the hill just before reaching it, he unfurled a small flag and made a signal. In an instant all was astir in the rebel camp, and artillery and cavalry soon came dashing down the hill. "Where is the prisoner?" yelled Price as he came to the bridge. "Perhaps the young man you left here has taken him to camp." "But the boat is gone. However, there is no time to be lost now. They are upon us. Quick!" Colonel Price started for the opposite end of the bridge, followed by his three Confederates. The rebel troops were still some distance from that end of the bridge nearest their camp, which it was evident they intended reaching, if possible, in order to sweep the narrow passage, if the Union forces attempted to cross. The Federals, however, were the first to gain that point. But, had a crossing been effected, as soon as they reached the opposite side they would have been exposed to the most galling fire of the enemy, as there was a large space of flat, swampy ground in front, and then a sharp bluff, upon which the rebel artillery would, in such a case, be planted. The commander of the Federals, observing this situation at a glance, ordered a halt, and brought his section of artillery into position. One piece was placed so as to enfilade the bridge, and the other upon a little rise of ground, in a position where it could sweep their lines beyond. The rebels, observing this, threw forward 2 guns, amid a deadly fire from the Unionists, and succeeded in taking a position upon the opposite end of the bridge. Several rounds of grape were hurled back and forth, but as the cover was good, but little damage was done. The cavalry attempted a crossing, but the thick growth of oaks prevented. A charge was about to be ordered across the bridge when an explosion took place, and it was shattered to fragments. Taking advantage of this, the rebels made a rapid flight. As pursuit was useless, the command was given to fall back to Springfield. The Indian we have spoken of now approached the commander, leading the trembling woman, and said, "Me save, you save, white squaw." "Do you require my protection?" asked the commander. Nettie told her story in an artless manner, of which the reader has gleaned all necessary particulars. She was kindly provided for, and soon reached Springfield in perfect safety. Soon after the arrival, a soldier came to the tent of the commanding officer, presenting a bit of paper. "Colonel, I picked up this scrap near the bridge, but did not look at it until this moment. It may be of importance." The colonel took the paper and read aloud. "A suspicion of my fidelity to the Confederate cause has crossed the mind of my commanding officer, Lieutenant Colonel A. M. Price, simply because I consented to assist Miss Nettie Morton to reach Springfield, from which point she might be able to rejoin her friends who formerly resided in Ozark, but are now in St. Louis. I was condemned, in consequence, to be the executioner of a wounded Federal officer. At this cowardly act my whole nature revolted. Chance has favored me, and I have determined to save him. In what matter I cannot here write, fearing this paper should fall into Confederate hands and my plans be thus interrupted. I cannot learn who he is. I asked his name, and I have some reason to believe that Miss Morton may throw some light upon the subject, as the only words he spoke were net, murdered, sister. He bore the rank of captain. Charles Campbell." The colonel turned toward Miss Morton, who was seated in his tent, and asked, "Do you feel any especial interest in any Union officer now with us?" Miss Morton hung her head and blushed. "Do not fear to speak, and frankly too, Miss Morton. Perhaps the welfare of one you love, perhaps his safety, may depend upon your candid confession." Have you ever met one of our officers?" "But once, and then I only passed the evening in his society. He was kind, but he has forgotten me." "It is enough. You love him. But the short time he was with you could scarcely have made an impression so deep that he would mutter your name in his delirium. And yet the wounded man was near your residence, and he exclaimed, 'Net! Your name is Nettie, is it not?" "It is." "And what is the name of him you refer to?" "Captain Harry Hayward." The officer was visibly affected. "Nettie, Nettleton, murdered, sister. It is very strange. Harry Hayward's body was not found, but he was assassinated. Ah, I begin to fathom the mystery." He murmured all this in words not audible to the astonished Miss Morton, and left the tent slowly, as if oppressed with the weight of a momentous thought. End of chapter 3.
Chapter 4 of Prisoner of the Mill. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Siobhan McAlpin. Prisoner of the Mill by Harry HAZELTON. Chapter 4. Nettleton's Adventure in a Noose. Some important information. The surprise of Walker was very great at the unexpected movement of Nettleton. His sword flashed from its scabbard, and he made a half-pass at his breast. But, checking himself, he said, "William, I can forgive you in consideration of your grief, and I spare you, that you may assist in the care of Miss Hayward." "Curse him," he muttered to himself. "I would strike the infernal dog dead at my feet, but the act would only place a greater barrier between me and my prize. Miss Hayward," he added aloud, "you will always find me ready and most anxious to serve you." "Miss Hayward will not for lack of friends, sir," replied Alabama, in a tone of contempt. "Captain Walker, I shall place the prisoner in your charge. You will forward at once." These words were spoken by the colonel. Walker bit his lip and was silent. He then commanded the guard to forward, muttering as he did so, The second most agreeable job. I'll revenge myself upon him. As the guard formed around Lieutenant Wells, he turned to Miss Hayward and said, "Oh, dear lady, you have inadvertently confessed that you have some regard for me. This is not the time to speak of such things, but I will now say to you that which has never before passed my lips, excepting to your brother. I love you with a devotion, ardent as it is pure and holy, and that by love I swear and beg you to believe that I have never harmed your brother." Miss Hayward turned toward him and made a movement as if to reach his side, but Walker held aloft the bloody knife, which met her gaze, and, with a shudder, she turned to Alabama. "Forward!" cried Walker, and Edward Wells, the once popular officer and general favorite, was urged on, bound and guarded, charged with, and generally believed guilty of, the foulest of crimes. But yesterday he was on the road to honor and fame. Now he was marching forward to a disgraceful death. The entire division was soon in motion. Nettleton now approached Miss Hayward and said, "Miss Mamie, I am going to do all for you that such a chap as me can do, but I'm feared I ain't much. But you're going now where there ain't no danger, and if you please, I'm going to stay behind and hunt for the captain." "Oh, thank you, William," sobbed Miss Hayward. "How can I ever repay you, dear friend?" Don't, said William. A choking sensation came over him, and, unable to say more, he turned away, only to be comforted by Miss Sally Long, who placed her hands upon his shoulders and said, "William, if you find the captain, I'll love you dearly." Nettleton started back, opened his eyes wide. So he did his mouth, as if attempting to speak. His lower jaw wagged 2 or 3 times, but no sound was heard. Then, turning his eyes, he saw the gaze of all fixed upon him, and started off suddenly upon a run, exclaiming as he did so, "Who ever thought it possible that I should ever be loved by Sally? Such a darned skunk. A sweet gal, I mean." Nettleton did not pause until he had overtaken the colonel, of whom he requested permission to remain and make a more thorough search for his captain. "No, William," was the reply. "We will not be a mile distant before the enemy's scouts will be here, and you will be taken prisoner." "No fear, they don't notice such as me." "But your uniform will be sufficient." "Oh, I always go prepared. I have another suit under this, one that I got from the bushwhack I laid out the other night, as he come nosing up around Captain Hayward's tramping ground, and I shall put that on top." "Well, do as you like, but be careful." Nettleton waited for no other words, but turning, proceeded at once to the spot where Hayward received the fatal stab. He sat down for a time, silent and mournful, gazing into the water. He then commenced a scrutinizing search. He became satisfied that the body could not have floated down the river, on account of the shallowness of the water. He crossed the stream, searched upon the opposite bank, and there found the footprints of a number of men. He followed the tracks and found that 2 persons had descended into the river and out again near the same spot. He took the measurements of each impression in the mud and then exclaimed, "I'll be darned if Lieutenant Wells' boot made any of them marks. I know how it is. Captain must have come here last night to think, and some of them darn rebel skunks come up behind him suddenly and killed him, and then 2 of them crossed over, got his body, and brought it back. And that accounts for the tracks in and out of the water. But what did they want with him if he were dead? Perhaps he wasn't quite killed, and they took him prisoner. I'll follow these tracks anyway." Nettleton followed up the footmarks until they merged into the turnpike, which was so cut up with travel as to prevent him tracing them further. He now returned to the fatal spot. Bending down, he examined the earth, still red with blood. Something appeared to interest him, and creeping on his knees, he followed a footprint to the edge of the stream. Here was the impression of 2 boots, side by side, in the mud. Nettleton gazed upon them for a few moments. His breast heaved violently. He clenched his hands, and at last said, "I've blacked them boots. I know 'em well. There is the impression of 2 hearts in the mud, and there ain't but what pair of boots in our camp that has 2 hearts made with nails in the ball of each foot. Oh, you darn..." Something caught the eye of Nettleton in the water. He sprung in and secured it. It proved to be a handkerchief, which bore a name upon the corner. He gazed upon it a moment and said, "The man as had them boots stood in them tracks, washed himself in that river. He wiped his handkerchief and then threw it in the water. Folks as washes the evidence of murder off their hands don't wash in the river, throw away the wiper, and then take a tin pot of bloody water to... What the devil are you doing here?" Nettleton turned to behold a party of 6 horsemen who had suddenly approached him. In his anxiety, he had forgotten to change his clothing, that is, to cover his blue uniform with the rough gray suit he wore underneath. "So, you were a Yankee soldier," exclaimed one of the party. "No, I ain't. I'm a darn skunk." This reply, and the ungainly appearance of Nettleton, caused a laugh throughout the entire party. "You're not a Yankee soldier? Then what are you doing in that uniform?" Nettleton looked at his dress, and for the first time became conscious that he had not changed it. He, however, instantly replied, "I am a spy for the general." "What general?" "General Price, to be sure." This created another fit of merriment. "Just as if the likes of you would be employed as a spy. Why, you don't even know enough to last you half a mile." "That's just the reason why I am a spy. I am such a darn skunk that no one pays any attention to me." "Have you been in the Yankee camp here?" "Yes." "Have you a Confederate uniform under that blue?" "Yes," replied Nettleton, throwing off his coat and exposing the gray. "To what company and regiment do you belong?" "No company. I go on my own hook." "You know General Price?" "Yeah, very well." "Have you ever been in his camp?" "Often." "Describe him." Nettleton had, on one occasion, accompanied a party of disguised Union officers into the very camp of Price, while that general held possession of the upper Osage. One of the officers, being detected and wounded, was borne along with the retreating rebel army from the Osage to Springfield, and Nettleton had followed on for the purpose of rendering assistance if possible. His apparent stupidity prevented suspicion, and he had been one of the leading spirits in a rescue which afterward occurred. He was, in consequence, not only known to General Price himself, but to a large number of his officers and men, and hence it was very desirable for him to avoid the main army. He supposed that he could deceive his captors or effect his escape, and the shadowy thought that Captain Hayward might have been seized and borne toward the rebel quarters at once decided his course. He gave an accurate description of Price. "Good," answered one of the party. "It is evident you are a spy. I find you on the spot the Yankees have just left. You have their uniform and ours under it. So far that looks well. You know you have perfectly described our general. That renders it certain you have seen him. Now one of 2 things is certain. You are a Yankee spy and have been in our camps with that gray uniform outside, and then communicated your information to your general, or you're a Confederate spy who, just having been to the Yankee camp, must have some important information for our general. In either case, we shall conduct you to him. If you are his man, then you will be all right, and if you are not, then you will be hung within a half hour after your arrival. You understand?" I first thought of going on to Springfield, but I think I have all the information necessary, and I have made up my mind to return. I halted here a moment to change my dress and to look for a Yankee officer who was supposed to be killed last night, but I think he was only badly wounded and may yet be found alive in the tall grass. Look for him." These words were spoken by Nettleton in an apparent cheerful tone. "Oh, you mean the captain who was stabbed last night?" Yes. Do you know anything of him?" "You appear especially anxious, Mr. What's your name?" "I am anxious," replied Nettleton fiercely. "He insulted me, and I would be revenged." "Don't trouble yourself. He'll catch it soon enough. He was not killed, but was taken out of the water by us." "Who struck the blow?" yelled Nettleton. "Not one of our party. We were concealed upon the opposite bank. We could not see the murderer strike, for it was too dark. But we saw the body thrown in the stream and saw the stabber wash himself in the river. We would have fired upon him, but we were afraid of rousing the Yanks. We waited until he left the body, after throwing it into the stream, and then we recovered it. The man was still alive. He had only fainted from loss of blood. We dressed his wound as well we could, and then conveyed to him a house on the other side of the pike. He will recover, but Colonel Price has an especial spite against him. He met him once at Springfield. So when he recovers, he will be hung. Where is he now? Asked Nettleton. A little house not 50 rods from here, just on the other side of the pike. Without a word, Nettleton bounded like a deer in the direction the Federal forces had taken. But a dozen shots were fired after him, and he fell. He was soon secured when it was ascertained that one bullet had cut the neck badly, and another had struck the ankle, although it had not broken the bone. He was still able to walk, and, after being bound, he was dragged forward towards Cassville. A march of 40 miles was almost too much for even the tough Nettleton, more especially as he had received a severe shot in the ankle, but he bore up firmly, and at last arrived to the outskirts of the rebel camp. He had become very lame, and rolled about like a ship in a heavy sea. As he entered the camp, many were the jeers and taunts which hailed the specimen of the Yankee soldier. Nettleton made no reply, although his countenance bespoke his contempt. He was now near the quarters of Price. "By thunder!" yelled one of the Confederate soldiers. "That is the very fellow who fooled us at Springfield. Hang him! Hang him!" An explanation was soon made, and Nettleton's fate appeared certain, as a drumhead court-martial had already been convened. Sentence was soon given. The Yankee spy was to be hung upon the spot. A rough scaffolding was formed under a large tree, and a rope with the fatal noose attached thrown over a limb. Nettleton ascended the platform in silence, although his face trembled. "I never saw a Yankee that yet did not fear to die," exclaimed one of the bystanders. "Then you see one now, you darned skunk," replied Nettleton. "Why do you tremble, then?" asked the Confederate. "I was thinking of the captain and his poor sister Mamie." "Ha ha ha! This booby's in love. A romantic spy. And the idol of his passion is called Mamie." "You lie, you dog!" yelled Nettleton. "What is all this?" asked a stately-looking officer who had just approached, and before whom all the rest fell back. "A spy, General," was the response. "Why was he not brought to my quarters?" "Because Raines offered a drumhead court-martial." "Release the man until I have conversed with him." Nettleton was released, and, as he descended from the scaffolding, he was recognized by General Price. "We have met before?" asked Price. "Yes, General, we have," was the prompt reply of Nettleton. "What were you doing in my camp the first time we met?" "Serving my captain, who I love." "Good. What are you doing here now?" "That will require considerable explanation," added Nettleton. "Go on," said Price. "Well, General, some darn skunk murdered my captain. And when our troops left Grand Prairie on their return to Springfield, I remained behind to search for his body. I am no spy." "But you said you were a spy serving General Price," replied one of these soldiers who had brought Nettleton to the rebel camp. "How can you explain this?" asked Price. "Well, you see, General, Miss Mamie, that's the captain's sister, will break her poor heart and die of grief if she can't learn something about her brother. The darn skunks as arrested me told me that Captain Hayward was not killed. Besides this, as nice as as good a man as ever lived, and one who loves Miss Sally. That Miss Sally keeps running in my head. One as loves Miss Mamie is accused of murdering the captain. But I know better, for I found proof enough to convict the right one. I wanted to tell Mamie that darn Sally, that her brother was not dead, and to clear Lieutenant Wells and convict him of the one that did his deed. So I told them sneaks as how I was a spy in hopes that they'd leave me alone." "Would you give any information you may have gleaned here, if I should set you free?" "I ain't no darn skunk, General. Honor is honor bright with me." "What have you seen here?" "A lot of the darndest sapheads I ever met." "If I should set you free, will you fight against me?" "Like the devil, the first time we meet in fair play." "Why do you wear that gray suit under your uniform?" "'Cause Captain's always getting himself into some scrape, and I have to hunt him up. Sometimes I have to go among the Johnnies to do it, and then the blue ain't healthy. Will you ever act as a spy upon me if I let you go? Not unless Captain does. But I'm his bodyguard. Shall go everywhere he does if I can. What is your name? William Nettleton. Well, William, I think we shall be obliged to hang you. All right, General, answered Nettleton, stepping upon the scaffolding again. And the darn sneaks shan't say they never seen a Yankee die bravely. But, General, let me ask you one favor. You don't want to see a good fellow shot for what he didn't do, and a murderer go clear, do you? Certainly not. Then all I ask is that you send this handkerchief to Colonel Mann and tell him that the murderer didn't wash in a basin in his tent, but in the river, and then threw his wiper away, and that the guilty one has 2 hearts made with nails on the sole of each boot. And then tell Mamie, that the captain is Lieutenant Wells, and Walker, the skunk, when I'm dead, that Sally, no Captain, won't think of poor Nettleton, and, oh, stop. William, I can never recollect all this. You had better go yourself and attend to the matter. What, General, do you mean it? Cried William, as he sprung from the scaffold and gazed earnestly at Price. On one condition I will permit you to go. Well, what is it? That as soon as you have given your evidence in the court-martial, which will probably be ordered, you will return at once and be hung. I'll do it. I'm a loafer if I don't. You swear it? Yes, by the great jumping Jingo and Sally Long's tearful eyes. The guard will see this man safely beyond our lines, said Price, speaking to one of his officers, and furnish him a pass and a horse. Let one of our men accompany him to the Federal lines and bring back the animal which William will ride. Nettleton rushed forward, and grasping the hand of Price, shook it violently, and exclaimed as he took his lead, General Price, you ain't such a darn sneak as I thought you was. End of Chapter 4.
Chapter 5 of Prisoner of the Mill. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Florence Short. Prisoner of the Mill by Harry Hazelton. Chapter 5. The Court-Martial and the Hostage. The division which had been encamped on Grand Prairie reached Springfield in safety and formed their temporary camp in the field back of the brick schoolhouse, which stands about 1/4 mile to the west of the new courthouse. The first order issued to the officers of the battalion of Benton Cadets, the 35th and 37th Illinois, was to assemble at a given time to act upon a court-martial at the quarters of Major D., Judge Advocate, to try the case of Lieutenant Edward Wells, charged with the willful murder of Harry Hayward, a captain in the service of the United States of America, and attached to the Army of the Mississippi, now under command of Major General Hunter. It was a sad day. Lieutenant Wells was a favorite with both officers and men of his command. He always had been mild as a female, kind and benevolent, sacrificing his own comfort for the good of the privates in his battalion. True, some said that Wells would not fight bravely, that he ought to have been created a woman, but everybody gave him credit for being the kindest of the kind. When first accused, there arose a very bitter feeling against him. Captain Hayward also was a great favorite with the men. He was a stern but kind soldier. When the news of his brutal murder came to the knowledge of his boys, their first cry was revenge, and they naturally sought someone on whom to wreak their vengeance. At first Lieutenant Wells narrowly escaped a summary fate, more especially as it was whispered about camp that Wells had become a suitor for the hand of the fair Mamie Hayward, had been rejected by her, and spurned by the captain. But in a short time it was given out that Mamie had confessed her affection for Wells, and that Captain Hayward had remarked in the presence of others that he deemed Wells an honorable man, and would gladly favor his suit. This turned the tide of feeling in favor of the lieutenant, and when the court-martial was convened, nothing but a conscientiousness of a soldier's duty prevented an open revolt, or at least a most decided and forcible expression of feeling. But trusting to the judgment of the officers forming the court, the soldiers decided to await the result. Have our readers ever witnessed a trial by court-martial? It is not like the ordinary court of justice. First, the charge is read as thus: Lieutenant Edward Wells of Company H, Battalion of B. C. is charged with the willful murder of Harry Hayward, a captain in the U.S. Army. Second, specification. First, in this that said Lieutenant Edward Wells did, on the night of the 7th day of November, 1861, assassinate and murder said, etc. Following this, in any case of the kind, would be found a list of specifications, setting forth in detail all the chief events connected with the crime. The prisoner was brought to the tent of Major D. to answer to the charge. He was very pale, yet perfectly composed, and when the question was asked, the ready and firm response was, "Not guilty." The judge advocate, a noble-hearted but just man, informed the prisoner that he was to act not only as prosecuting counsel, but as counsel for the prisoner, and that he, the judge advocate, must give the prisoner the benefit of any doubt that might arise in his favor. To those of our readers not familiar with the modus operandi of a court-martial, we would give the following information for their benefit. The doors of the court are closed to all outsiders. The prisoner makes his plea and retires. The witnesses are brought forward and examined, but no cross-examination is allowed. If a question is to be asked by any of the officers sitting upon the court, it must be reduced to writing and silently handed to the judge advocate. If he sees fit to put the question, it is done. If not, it is thrown aside. We will now proceed to a brief summary of the trial. Lieutenant Edward Wells, you are charged with the willful murder of Harry Hayward, a captain in the United States service. What is your plea? Guilty or not guilty? Not guilty, was the decided response. Let the first witness be called. George Swasey, colored. The person familiarly known as Swasey's nigger took the stand. When brought forward, he glanced around as if fearful of something, and then asked, "Is Massa Williams Nettleton where he can hear dis child tell de truth?" "You have nothing to fear from any person, if you do speak the truth, and all the truth," replied Major D. "Well den, de fact am dis. I went to see my gal. When I come back, I met de Rebs. I hid behind a log. I'd seed someone stick a knife in Massa cabin, and I heard him say, 'Oh, Nettleton, you kill me.'" All questions were answered in this same spirit, and it became evident that the Negro believed Nettleton the real murderer. The next witness brought upon the stand was Alabama Hinton. She swore that Nettleton's tent was next to the one she occupied, that he was in attendance upon her and Miss Hayward, by permission of Captain Hayward, and that Nettleton had not been out of her presence that night. In the first part of the evening, Nettleton had remained near her door. In the latter part, he had missed his captain, and had prostrated himself on a rug near the tent entrance. She had seen him there all night, as she had not slept at all. Miss Hayward was too much overcome to appear as a witness, and was excused. The next witness was Captain Hugh Walker. The feeling of the soldiers to learn the result of the trial was intense, and by the time Captain Walker was called to the stand, some 20 or 30 had crept to the edge of the tent, and endeavored to conceal themselves in the tall grass outside to catch the proceedings. but they were discovered by Walker, who demanded that they should be removed. This was done, and a guard placed outside. Captain Walker's oath was as follows: "On the night of the 7th of November, I followed Captain Hayward from his tent. It was at the time gradually becoming dark. My motive in doing so I will explain. As soon as it began to be rumored that we were to meet Price, I observed a change in the conduct of Captain Hayward. He had ever been the center of attraction. His tent was the headquarters of our circle, drawn thither by the natural gaiety of the captain, and the presence there of ladies. But this feeling appeared to forsake him, and on more than one occasion he denounced the war as inhuman. Pardon me, I would not speak against the dead, but I doubted the loyalty of the man, and not his courage, and this it was which induced me to follow him. I halted beneath a large tree which stood near the spot where the murder evidently was committed. I saw the captain seat himself upon the bank. At this time it was quite dark, but I saw a shadow approaching. It passed near me, but I failed to discover who it was. I first thought it might be William Nettleton, following his master. I listened attentively, however, as the extreme caution of the intruder attracted my attention. In an instant I heard a groan, a heavy fall, and a voice exclaimed, "Oh, William, where are you?" "Nettleton, I am murdered. Wells is the assassin." A shudder ran through the court. Major D dropped his head upon his hand and was silent. The officers whispered together. At last a written question was handed to the judge advocate, which was promptly asked. "Captain Walker, why did you not give the alarm, or arrest the murderer yourself?" "Sir," was the prompt reply, "the sequel will show. It was dark. I could not distinguish the features of any person 2 yards distant. I feared he might escape if he should discover me. I therefore followed the murderer cautiously, and he entered the tent of Lieutenant Wells. He did not strike a light, but I listened, and heard him washing himself. I kept close watch upon him until morning, to make sure I wasn't accusing an innocent man. No one entered or left the tent. The one who washed his hands and left the bloody water was Lieutenant Edward Wells." This evidence was conclusive, but no reason could be assigned for the murder, unless it was that Miss Hayward had been heard to say that she never should marry and leave her brother so long as he lived, and it had now become well known that Wells was a suitor for her hand. Still, he was a favorite with the captain, and even on the day of his death Hayward had been heard to say that he believed Wells a man of honor, whose suit he would favor. The only conclusion which could be arrived at was that Wells believed the love of a sister was too strong to give immediate place to the love of a wife, and he felt that, the brother once removed, he alone would become the object of Miss Hayward's affection. This, though but a flimsy pretext for so awful a crime, was all that anyone could offer in the way of a surmise. The trial was over, but one decision could be given. It soon was rumored about camp that sentence had been passed, and that at 4 o'clock the next day it would be read to the prisoner in presence of the whole division. The night was wearing on. A form, closely enveloped, approached the tent of the commanding general. It proved to be the Lady Alibamo. "What is the will of our daughter of the army?" asked the general kindly. "It is that I may visit Lieutenant Wells, and bring him to my tent. I desire that an interview should take place between Miss Hayward and the doomed man." The general seated himself at his table, and penned a few words, which he handed to Mrs. Hinton. She glanced at the contents, and then falling at the feet of that officer she seized his hand, and kissing it, sobbingly exclaimed, "What? Without his chains? God bless you, God bless." There, go, don't make me weep, or I won't forgive you," returned the veteran warrior as he turned away. Alibamo left his tent, and in a few minutes entered her own in company with Lieutenant Wells, now free from all apparent restraint. When Wells entered the tent, Miss Hayward was kneeling by the side of her camp cot, her face buried in the folds of its coverings. For several moments not a word was spoken, and, as Wells gazed upon the stricken sister, he trembled violently, while a groan of intense anguish escaped him. Alibamo advanced, and gently touching her companion, said, "Mamie, my darling, here is our friend, Lieutenant Wells." Miss Hayward did not raise her head, but reached forth her hand towards Wells, which, quickly kneeling by her side, he took and pressed to his lips. "Oh, heaven bless you," he moaned. "You do not believe me capable of the dreadful crime with which I am charged?" Miss Hayward tried to speak, but convulsive sobs choked her utterance. "No, my ever kind and dear friend," replied Alibamo. "She does not believe you guilty, nor am I satisfied that Captain Hayward has been killed. I am under the impression that he was wounded and taken prisoner by some rebels, who were lurking near our camp." "You hope for the best, and so do I. But have you any grounds for the formation of such an opinion?" asked Wells. "Yes, and to me the best of evidence. William Nettleton went in search of the captain. If he was killed, William would have found his body before this, and returned to us with the intelligence. His continued absence convinces me that the captain is still alive, and that his faithful friend Nettleton is at this moment following him. It is this hope which gives me fresh courage, and I believe a few days will see you free, and your name as untarnished as it should be. I wished to tell you this, and I also wished Miss Hayward to express to you personally her confidence in your innocence. Hence, I brought you here. You may leave us now, as my poor friend is too much agitated to converse." Wells was about to depart in silence, but Miss Hayward for the first time raised her face, and her tearful eyes met his own. He sprung forward, and kneeling before her, pressed his lips to her white forehead, and said, "That look is worth to me years of happiness, but you can read my heart now. When I am proved innocent, then I will speak the words which must not, till then, pass my lips. God bless you." He arose to depart, but was met by Captain Walker, who had just entered the tent. Walker cast a rapid glance around him, and placing his finger upon his lips, enjoined silence upon all. Wells stood, with arms folded, sternly and suspiciously gazing upon him, while Alibamo asked, "What are your wishes, sir?" "To serve you and your friend," was the reply, spoken in a low voice, and with apparent hesitation. "It must be an important service which could render pardonable the fact, sir, of you having, unannounced and so rudely intruded upon our privacy," said Mrs. Hinton. "It is an important service, no less than the rescue of— Will you be seated?" The parties seated themselves in silence, when Walker continued, "You must pardon me if I speak plainly and directly to the point. It is necessary that I should be brief." "Proceed, sir." "Miss Hayward," continued Walker, turning toward the lady, "I must give a few words of explanation to you. I do love you now. You need not shrink from me. You will, upon hearing my words, understand me better. No man loves without hope until there arises between him and the one beloved some impassable barrier. The barrier which arose to blast my hopes was your previous love, and the unfortunate circumstance which has made me an unwilling witness against one to whom, as I think, your heart still clings. You will please be brief in comment, and come as quickly as possible to the point in question, replied Mrs. Hinton, as she observed the agitation of Miss Hayward. I come to the point now. I know Miss Hayward is very unhappy, and I would not add to it. I would save her lover. To whom do you refer? Asked Wells coldly. To you, sir, was the prompt reply. I cannot claim the title you honor me with in connection with that lady. Besides, she might not thank you for such a service. Oh, yes, yes, eagerly replied Miss Hayward, as she gazed upon the speaker. Stay one moment, Miss Hayward, answered Wells. Let us first learn in what manner my deliverance can be effected. Captain Walker, you can proceed. You speak very coldly, Lieutenant Wells, to one who comes to offer you service. But before I proceed, I must exact a promise that if my proposition is not accepted, those to whom my words are addressed will make no exposure of the same. There was a nod of assent, and Walker proceeded. I will not deny the fact that solicitude for Miss Hayward impels the act, but of this no more. Lieutenant Wells, you are unbound and unwatched. Place your sash across your breast, as worn by the officer of the day. I will give you the countersign, and thus you will be enabled to pass the pickets, and make good your escape. You can secure a safe retreat, and after the excitement of this unfortunate affair has died away, Miss Hayward can be apprised of your place of concealment, and take such action in the case as her judgment or heart may dictate. A death-like silence reigned for a moment, during which rapid glances were exchanged between the friends. At length Wells asked, Captain Walker, would not an escape imply, upon my part, an acknowledgment of the crime of which I am accused? It might, in the estimation of many, but you are generally believed guilty. What matter it what your actions imply to them? Your friends here, who have already made up their minds, will merely look upon it as a desire upon your part to escape a certain and unmerited and a dishonorable death. And you will assist my flight? I will. And will you afterward convey Miss Hayward to me if she will come? With pleasure. You but anticipate my intended services. Another rapid and significant glance passed between Mrs. Hinton and Wells, which was not observed by Walker. One thing more, Walker. Do you believe me guilty of murder? I did. And now? I may have been mistaken, but be that as it may, I will assist your flight. Are you ready? Asked Wells, rising. I wish you to return to your cell, and when all is ready, say 2 or 3 o'clock, I will come for you. But I will not go, was the firm reply. Walker perceived his mistake and quickly added, As you please, sir. And turning, he was about to leave the tent when he was confronted by the officer of the day. Captain Walker, he said sternly, you feel an especial interest in Lieutenant Wells? I did not suppose so, but learned the fact from your conversation. I am glad you do feel so great a friendship for him. You shall have the opportunity to make it manifest. You shall become his Pythias. What do you mean, sir? This, that the sentence of Lieutenant Wells will be read tomorrow afternoon at 4 o'clock. In the meantime, you, as his dear friend, do not wish to see him confined, and will most cheerfully take his place in the prison and wear his chains. If the lieutenant is present tomorrow at 4, you, as his hostage, will be released. If he should escape, as you have advised, Of course you will be held as an aider and abettor in that escape, and when you receive that punishment your guilt deserves, you will have the consolation of knowing that you suffer for the benefit of your very dear friend." "Soldiers," commanded the officer, "place the irons upon Captain Walker, and convey him to the guard-room in the old log building." "Are you mad? You dare not do it," yelled Walker, as he foamed with rage. But the soldiers promptly obeyed the command, and Walker was taken from the tent. "This indignity shall be avenged." But he was carried quickly forward, and the guard-room door soon closed upon him. "You will be at liberty, upon your parole of honor, until tomorrow at 4 o'clock, Lieutenant Wells." The officers shook hands and separated. End of Chapter 5.
Chapter 6 of Prisoner of the Milne. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Marty in Jacksonville, Florida. Prisoner of the Milne by Harry Hazelton. Chapter 6. Just as the fading twilight was yielding to darkness, and before Lieutenant Wells had been removed from his cell by request of Alibamo, a scene occurred to which we must revert. The room in which Wells was placed was in the wing of a log house, just in the rear of the brick schoolhouse to which we have alluded. 2 doors led from this apartment, one opening into the garden, the other into the main building. This latter door had been firmly secured. Near that opening into the garden was a small window, the only one in the apartment. As the guard was stationed at the door, escape from the room was impossible. Surrounding this garden were a number of hedges, running in various directions, some of them forming the street fence, while others ornamented the winding gravel walks. As soon as it was quite dark, a person closely enveloped and disguised emerged from among the tents and passed cautiously along in the still intenser darkness of the hedge shadow. Ever and anon he would pause and listen. Finally he reached the further hedge, remote from the camp. He paused a moment and then gave a low and peculiar whistle. It was immediately answered, and 2 men joined the first comer. "Are you ready?" "No," was the answer. "And why not?" "Because we have not received our pay." "Is that the only reason?" "The only reason, after you have given us full instructions." "Where is your powder?" "In the upper part of the garden, under the hedge. We have secured 8 12-pound shells which we took from that battery over yonder. Powder enough to blow a mountain to the devil." "Well, here is 100 apiece. When the job is done, you will find as much more in the hollow log that I pointed out last night. Be careful and make sure work." "Well, your instructions?" "You will follow the outer hedge. Creep along with great caution and make no noise. There will be no danger, as the guard are not on the north side of the camp. When you reach the log building in the rear of the brick schoolhouse, you will observe a small wing or addition extending to the rear. At the back of this wing you will find an excavation under the house sufficiently large for your shells. Place them in it, lay your train, and then apply the torch. But you must do this with great caution, as a guard is stationed upon the opposite side." "Don't be alarmed. Anyone near that old log shanty will go to Kingdom Come before tomorrow morning." The trio then separated. When Captain Walker was seized and chained by the soldiers, he made a desperate resistance, but in vain. He soon occupied the little room vacated by Lieutenant Wells. The door closed. He heard the clanking of the heavy chains which secured it, and left him in utter darkness. He stamped and raved and cursed, suddenly starting and wildly clutching his throat, as if some terrible thought had crossed his mind. He groaned and sunk upon the floor. Fool, oh fool that I was! I thought if I pretended friendship and offered to assist in his escape, all suspicion of this night's work would be diverted from me. But now, oh my God, what is the hour? Hark! I hear them working under the building. No, it is not the men yet. It is too early. I dare not tell the guard, for an acknowledgment of any suspicion of such a plot would be a confession of my guilt. Let me search for some mode of escape. Walker crawled cautiously around the floor, but not a crevice could be found. Finally, exhausted, he sunk down, giving way to his utter despair. An hour, 2 hours, dragged slowly by, which appeared an age of misery to the wretched man. If I give the alarm, even saying that a peculiar sound attracted my attention, the ruffians who are to do the work will recognize me, and I shall, thus implicated, suffer an ignominious death. What is that? Great God, they are at work! But they are making so much noise that the guard will hear them, and I shall yet be saved. Don't make quite so much noise in there, if you please, exclaimed the guard as he knocked upon the door where he was stationed. It's not me, yelled the frantic man. Someone is at the rear of the building trying to dig through. They want to kill me. We will see about that, replied the guard as he left his post and walked toward the spot indicated. Walker fell upon his knees and exclaimed, Oh, I am saved, saved that dreadful death. He bent down, and applying his ear to a small crevice between the logs where the mud mortar had fallen out, he listened. He could distinctly hear the words spoken. Have you silenced that damned guard? Was asked. Yes, cut his wizen. No danger. Hurry with the train of powder. Gentlemen, yelled Walker, don't go any further. I am not the man. Quick, fire the train, exclaimed a voice outside. A flash was seen, and then another said, Curse it, the train has failed. Throw the torch among the shells and then run. Walker waited to hear no more, but throwing himself with all his violence against the door, he set up a series of yells, which made the camp ring. In a moment steps were heard, the door was thrown open, and Walker, livid with fear and frantic, staggered into the open air, gasping for breath. When he had sufficiently recovered his fright to listen, the commander of the squad said, The powder plot has been discovered, sir. There is no further danger on that head, but you will return to your cell. This order Walker was compelled to obey, and he was again left in darkness, with feelings better imagined than described. The night wore slowly away. Lieutenant Wells had retired to his own tent. His calmness of demeanor certainly did not indicate a guilty mind. Alibamo, too, was wakeful, and strove by every possible kindness to sustain the heart and hopes of her suffering companion. Miss Nettie Morton, who had so recently joined their society, was occupying a tent in company with Miss Sally Long, near that of Mrs. Hinton. They also were watchful, anxious for the morrow. But perhaps the most wretched person in that camp was Captain Hugh Walker. No officer would have dared to place irons upon him and confine him in a rough cell upon any slight pretext. Was it not possible that something of a serious character had been discovered against him? This surmise seemed to haunt him, for he acted in a manner to indicate the wildest apprehensions of danger. Morning came at last, and slowly the day advanced. A guard brought Walker his breakfast, but the man refused to answer any question. During the afternoon he heard the beating of the drums and the bugle blast, which he well understood was calling the division together for some important purpose. He felt satisfied that one object was the reading of the finding of the court-martial in the case of Lieutenant Wells. But what part was he to play in the scene? This was the question which caused his heart to beat with violence as the chains fell from the door of his prison, and he was called forth. He accompanied the guard in silence, and soon entered the hollow square formed by the 3 brigades of the division. Walker glanced eagerly around, and there, standing beside the commanding general, was Lieutenant Wells, with Miss Hayward leaning upon his arm, and near them were their female friends. But a few paces distant were the 2 ruffians who had been engaged in the powder plot. All was silent. The general advanced and said, "Preliminary to other proceedings, I wish to ask Captain Walker if he ever before saw these 2 men." The ruffians advanced, rattling their chains, but Walker drew back, and with forced calmness he replied, "I never have." He dropped his head, gazing upon the ground. The adjutant, who held the sealed orders of the court-martial, by which Lieutenant Wells had been tried, then advanced, and was about to commence reading the document in his hand when a series of yells were heard, and in the distance was seen the grotesque form of Nettleton, as he came bounding along and bellowing, "Stop the shooting! Stop the shooting!" It was well known throughout the army that Nettleton had remained behind in search of Captain Hayward. As he approached, the most intense excitement was manifest. Lieutenant Wells could scarcely control his feelings, and would have rushed forward to meet Nettleton, had not Mrs. Hinton gently laid her hand upon his arm, begging him to be calm. Miss Hayward clung closer to her lover, as she hoped the news about to be brought by her brother's friend would relieve her agony of suspense. A half-suppressed cheer broke from the soldiers as Nettleton burst into the square. He paused for a moment, his breast heaving and his eyes glaring wildly, but an instant was sufficient for him to discover that Wells was yet alive, and that the object of his suspicion also lived. He sprung forward, and, without uttering a word, seized Walker by the foot, which he at once drew under his arm. Then he as suddenly bounded for the spot where the commandant was standing, dragging the foot along with him. Of course, this sudden movement on the part of Nettleton had thrown Walker violently upon his head, and although he kicked and squirmed and cursed, he was dragged along as if he had been a child. When Nettleton reached the commander, he held the foot of Walker within a few inches of that officer's face and yelled, "Look! Look, General! See them boots!" Notwithstanding the intense anxiety felt for the result of Nettleton's search, the ridiculous figure he presented in his eagerness, and that of Walker, who was twisting and struggling to escape, a general laugh ran through the division, which was joined in by the commander. Even Wells could not suppress a smile. "And what about those boots?" asked the commander, after silence had been restored. "Why, I blackened them!" yelled Nettleton. Another laugh was heard along the line. "No doubt you have blackened them, but what of this?" "Why, General, don't you see them 2 hearts made with nails on the sole of that boot?" "Certainly I see them, and what then?" Walker was now permitted to resume his upright position, and he stood trembling with fear and rage, as Nettleton went on to relate his first suspicions of Walker, his search for the body of Captain Hayward, his finding the impression of the footprints standing side by side in the mud at the edge of the stream with the marks of 2 hearts in the sole of each boot, and then the finding of the handkerchief in the water, which Nettleton then produced. The officer took the white linen witness, examining it closely, and then said, "Here is the name of Walker in the corner. William, did you find this near the place where the murder was committed?" "Right by the spot where them 2 boots stood," replied Nettleton, pointing to Walker's feet. "I can explain this," exclaimed Walker. "I went to the river that day to wash, and I stood upon the bank to do so. I presume I left the impression of my boots there at that time. If I did not, was I not also present in the morning to examine the spot where the murder had been committed? And is it a wonder that the impression of my boots should be left behind?" "That is certainly true," replied the general. "But of the handkerchief? It fell from my hands as I was washing. I did not take the trouble to recover it." "It is very probable," replied the general. "So you perceive," replied Walker, as he appeared to gain courage, "your trumped-up evidence has fallen to the ground. I did not expect a combination of both officers and men against me, but I find it so." And they wish to see me suffer for the bloody deed done by that coward? The only reason I can assign for this persecution is that he is in favor with the ladies, and you, sycophants that you are, hope through him to gain favor with his fair companions. No doubt that some bargain to that effect already has been effected." Captain Walker had by this time become eloquent and defiant. Nettleton, with his too eager perceptions, had failed to foresee the possible fallacy of his proofs, for hope and prejudice together had prevented any calm examination of his evidence. With a sorrowful and troubled look, he turned away. This gave Walker greater confidence, and in a loud but hoarse voice he cried, "And now I demand justice." "Which you shall have," replied the general. "But first answer me, how did this handkerchief, which bears your name, and which you confessed to having used in the stream, become bloody?" That was another point of interest, and Nettleton paused to listen attentively. "I had a bleeding at the nose, and the reason I threw the dirty thing away was I did not think it worth washing." "Then some person must have recovered it, washed it very carefully, and thrown it into the stream again, for there is no blood upon it." Walker attempted a reply, but his utterance failed. The general enjoined silence, and then stepping forward he said, in a voice sufficiently loud to be heard by all present, "Captain Walker, I must sum up before you the evidence of crimes you have committed, which have no parallel in the history of the army, or of crimes which have ever been or attempted to be committed in any civilized country. I would give you the benefit of a court-martial, were there any doubt of your guilt, and even now may order a trial, but it will only be a formal one. You had better confess your guilt here, before all, ask their pardon, make reparation to those you have most injured, and die repentant." "I have nothing to confess," responded Walker bitterly. "Have you no fear of the revelations of these two soldiers?" asked the general, pointing to the chained ruffians. "I have no fear. No doubt they have been bribed to conspire with you. But vent your spite. Go on." "Then, Captain Walker, I will briefly enumerate the circumstances which have been developed, as well as the facts. The morning we left Grand Prairie, you were in command of the squad which escorted the prisoner, Lieutenant Edward Wells. You had not proceeded far when you were overtaken by two men. It was a very easy matter to secure an audience with you, as you were in the rear of the division. They suggested that you should deliver Lieutenant Wells to them, as their commander had an especial spite against him and wished to secure his person. You asked these men, I refer to the two ruffians now in chains and standing by your side, how they dared to approach you on such a subject, and they replied that they had witnessed your act the evening previous, and that you need not put on airs with them. You then requested these fellows to meet you the next evening at the upper hedge. You instructed them to secure a number of pounds of powder for some purpose, which you would then explain. You met them the next evening, you gave them instructions, they were about to act upon them, when your outcries from the cell in which you had been placed, and which Lieutenant Wells had left only a short time previously, attracted the attention of the guard, and you were rescued. Prior to this, you had offered to assist Lieutenant Wells to escape, but you wished him to return to his cell and remain until 2 or 3 o'clock. The fiendish act was to be committed between 12 and 1. You pretended friendship, that all suspicion of the act might be diverted from you. Have I spoken correctly, sir? No doubt you have spoken according to the story of the ruffians, replied Walker. You cannot bring against me any respectable proof. I look to a court for the justice which I have no reason to expect here. Look. Walker, who had been shaking like a guilty wretch during the speech of the commander, turned in the direction indicated. The rough garb had fallen from the ruffians. Their chains were thrown aside, and, to his astonishment and horror, there stood two of the regimental Union officers, Adjutant Hinton, the husband of Alibamo, and his friend, Captain Clark. Walker, who now saw how he had been entrapped, and detected in his infamy for a moment, was utterly unmanned, but his resolute nature soon triumphed over his fear. Well realizing that penitence could not save him, he sprung to his feet and said, "This is all a miserable, contemptible conspiracy, an effort to make out a case against me to shield that woman's pet from the consequences of his clearly proven crime. Hayward is dead and cannot be made to answer, else—" "You lie, you dirty, nasty, murdering skunk!" What? Exclaimed a dozen voices.
"He lies, the coward that stabs a man in the dark. Hayward is not dead, but lives, and will soon, by his evidence, send this murderer to kingdom come."
With a shriek, Miss Hayward bounded forward and fell at the feet of Nettleton, grasping his hands. Wells, who had borne bravely up until this moment, covered his face and wept tears of joy and of relief from the imputation of crime. Sally Long sprung to the side of Nettleton, and, throwing her arms around his neck, she gave him a hearty kiss, which caused him to roll up his green eyes and appear in almost as much agony as if he had been struck in the stomach with a cannon ball. The word was soon passed, and the soldiers, catching the fire, made the very welkin ring with their shouts, while the band chimed in with the stirring strain, "Hail to the Chief." End of Chapter 6. Recording by Marty in Jacksonville, Florida.
Chapter 7 of Prisoner of the Mill. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Prisoner of the Mill by Harry Hazelton. Chapter 7. A Live Hero. The Retrograde Army Movement. The villain Walker was returned to his lonely cell. Lieutenant Wells was released from all restraint. The soldiers dispersed to talk about the strange turn events had taken. But the center of attraction was Nettleton. He was seated in front of the Hinton tent. Close beside him was Miss Hayward, kneeling, and gazing mournfully into his face, while Alibamo, Wells, the General, Nettie Morton, Sally Long, the officers who had composed the court-martial, the especial friends of the parties, and as many of the soldiers as could get within hearing distance, were earnestly listening to the narrative of the bodyguard. Nettleton went on to relate his meeting the rebel scouts, and the fact of their having informed him that Hayward had only been wounded and conveyed toward Wilson's Creek by a party attached to the command of Lieutenant Colonel Price. The reader will mark the distinction between Lieutenant Colonel Price, who was a ruffian guerrilla and had broken his parole 3 times, an act repudiated by all honest soldiers of either army, and General Sterling Price, who, although a rebel, always had acted in a gentlemanly and humane manner to all prisoners of war. After listening to the story of William, the general drew from his pocket the note which had been found at the Ozark Bridge, signed Charles Campbell. This note must have been written but a few moments before the fight took place. The date would be just 2 days after Hayward had received the assassin's stroke, giving about the proper time for the wounded man to be carried from Grand Prairie to Ozark, at which latter place Lieutenant Colonel Price had formed a temporary camp. The writer spoke of a wounded man in a boat, and against whom Price had had an especial spite. This confirmed the conviction that Hayward had been taken thither for the especial gratification of Price's fiendish propensities. The note also said that he bore the marks of a captain's rank, and, in his delirium, spoke of Net, which might have referred to the young lady, Nettie Morton, whom he possibly might have seen in the distance upon the bank, as the boat neared the spot where she was standing, or, as seemed more probable, that the wounded captain was calling upon Nettleton. At all events, it was decided that the person of whom Charles Campbell had written was no other than Captain Hayward. It is true, he was still almost insensible from his wounds, and was near the camp of his most unforgiving enemy, but there was a friend at hand, an enemy in arms, but a friend to the wounded and helpless soldier, as are all true men, and he had written that he would save him. "Why should we not hope?" asked Alabama, as she clasped her friend Mamie in her arms. "And why should we not act?" cried Wells, as he clutched the hilt of his sword. "Yes, we will act," yelled Nettleton, as he sprung up and appeared ready for instant departure. "Go, William. Follow the stream from Ozark until you find some trace, and then return to us," said Miss Hayward, eagerly. Nettleton turned his gaze upon Miss Sally for a moment, and then, as if ashamed of his hesitation or of his weakness in exhibiting any symptoms of love, he started with a bound, exclaiming, "I'm off. Good-bye, all." He had proceeded, however, but a few steps, when he halted, and scratching his head, his countenance assumed a most woeful expression, and his eyes rolled wildly about. "What is the matter, William?" asked Wells. "Got to go the other way," was the melancholy reply. "Why so?" "Oh, just a bit of fun, that's all." "Well, tell us what it is, Nettleton." "I can't. It will break her heart," he replied, pointing to Sally. "So it would, William, if anything dreadful should happen to you," replied Miss Long, as she dropped her eyes to the ground. "There, didn't I tell you so?" replied the faithful servant, his mouth gaping and his eyes expanding. "William," asked Wells, "do you really love Miss Long?" "Love her, Lieutenant? That ain't no name for it. Why, can't you see yourself that she's the sweetest darn the nicest critter in the world, exceptin' Miss Mamie?" "And does she love you, William?" asked Alabama, smiling, in spite of herself, at the tableau enacting before her. "Of course I do," replied Sally, proudly and triumphantly, as if a victory had been won. "There, there. Do you hear that? Now don't you pity me? I believe I am the most ugly cuss in the world. I never thought anybody would ever love me, and now I find out the gal as I wants most is just the one as does love me. Oh, Lordy, I'm sick, I do believe." "All right," Wells responded with a smile. "All right. Not by a blasted sight, sir. Did you think it all right when you loved Miss Mamie and thought you had to swing?" "What? You talk in riddles. Explain." "I've got to be hung," he roared, but whether with pain or delight none could tell. "Why, you didn't have anything to do with hurting the captain?" cried Sally, as she advanced toward her beloved. Nettleton gazed at her an instant with a most singular expression, and then replied, "Miss Long, never let suspicion cross that delicate mind of yours, but like the true turtle-dove, put your trust in the uprighteousness of your future lord and master. What is to be hanged all on account of the first time you wrapped them delicate arms of yourn around my long neck." "William, what do you mean by being hanged?" asked the general. Nettleton then went on to relate the agreement he had made with Price, to return and undergo the punishment which was about to be inflicted upon him, when that general interfered. He declared his intention of returning at once, as his furlough had run out, and as a man of honor he must return. "And do you really intend to return?" asked the general. "Of course I do," replied William, with something of scorn and much of pride in his tones. "William, think for a moment. You are now safe. You are with one who loves you, and with whom you can be happy. Why will you return?" "General, don't argue this point with me. I said I would come back, and darn me if I don't." Nettleton started, after having shook the hand of his friends. "Stay a moment, Nettleton," said the general. "I have a letter from General Price with regard to you." Nettleton paused and listened, as the commander, opening the envelope, read, "Camp near Cassville, November 12th, 1861. To General . Greeting. A prisoner of war was released from our camp, and permitted to return to Springfield on the 9th. It was at first thought that he was a spy, as he had been seen in and near our camp before, and he was about to suffer death upon the scaffold. When I saw and questioned him, I became convinced that he was no spy, but a faithful servant and friend, searching for his captain, whom he loved. I ordered his release. I gave him a parole of honor. He promised to return that the sentence of the Drumhead Court could be carried into effect upon him, after he had given the evidence he possessed, which he declared was necessary to save an innocent man. I admire his truthfulness. Should he be determined to return, of which I have no doubt, you will read this letter, which releases William Nettleton from any further obligation. He will remain with his friends and be happy. Signed by the AAAG. For the Commander, Bryce. The effect upon the gallant fellow of the reading of this letter was somewhat singular. He stood for a moment gaping around upon the spectators as if he had been caught in some mean act. Then a smile came over his face like sunlight creeping over a rugged mountain top. Soon his countenance looked like a newly risen sun, fairly blazing with blushes. Then with a wild whoop, which rung out like a signal, he sprung into the air, rattled his feet together, and once on earth again bounded off like a great moose for the nearest thicket, where to indulge his feelings without restraint. The crowd dispersed in good humor, to talk over the strange events of an hour. If one heart was happier than all, it was that of poor Mamie, whose joy at the proven innocence of her friend and lover was too intense for words. In her heart a new hope had also arisen, that her dear brother would again be restored to her arms, and thus fill up the cup of her blessings to the brim. It had been decided by the friends of Hayward that a search for the captain would be useless, but it was hoped that Charles Campbell would give some information which would lead to his discovery, or that Fall Leaf, a celebrated Indian scout, who had now been absent many days on the very line of the enemy's march, would return with some tidings, by which the actions of the captain's anxious friends should be governed. The Army of the Mississippi, having passed from Fremont's command to that of General Hunter, had been ordered to fall back from Springfield in 2 columns, the one by the way of the Osage and Warsaw to Tipton, Missouri, on the line of the main Pacific Road, and the other by way of Lebanon on the main road between Springfield and Rolla, the southwestern branch of the same road. Each place, in distance from Springfield, was about 125 miles. The march of the division to which Captain Hayward's friends were attached, which was under the command of the brave Sigel, was commenced on the morning of November 20th. That division formed the rear of the entire army. It proceeded by the Rolla Turnpike. Nothing of note transpired until the division was ascending the rolling hill about 2 miles before reaching Lebanon, when a horseman, his face and head streaming with blood, rode rapidly along the lines, exclaiming, "Fight in front! Fight in front!" He halted for no one to question him, but kept on his way. No guns were heard, and many expressed the opinion that it must be a strange fight. But, as a necessary precaution, the infantrymen were halted, their pieces loaded, and bayonets fixed. The artillery was charged, and flags unfurled. As the troops ascended the hill, and looked in vain for a foe, the question was asked, "Where is the fight?" This was soon settled, as another messenger rode up and informed the general that a party or squadron of rebel cavalry, numbering about 400, had attacked a little band of home guards of about 30, which had been collected in a valley some 20 miles south of Lebanon, on the main road, in a place called Bohannan Mills Valley. Most of the 30 home guard had been killed, wounded, or dispersed by the guerrillas. Then all families in that vicinity known to entertain Union proclivities were visited at the dead of night. Murder and arson was the cry. Many poor creatures soon were in the agonies of death. Husbands who had rushed from concealment to defend their wives had been cloven to the earth. Children ran shrieking to and fro, only to be dashed to pieces by the savages of the Missouri mountain. It was a carnival of lust and blood, over which the historian ever must dwell in horror, and yet those fiends in human shape were protected by the aegis of the Confederate flag. Such was the scene depicted by the messenger, when the division was halted, and a consultation took place. It was decided that while the main army went forward, 2 companies of infantry, a section of artillery, and a company of cavalry should be detached to proceed at once to Bohannan Mills, to protect the helpless families, and if possible to punish the rebel horde which had committed such awful crimes against humanity. End of chapter 7.
Chapter 8 of Prisoner of the Mill. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by andrelevy, Lisbon, Portugal. Prisoner of the Mill by Harry HAZELTON. Chapter 8. Gone, the Signal Song. We must now take the reader back to Springfield. It was 1 week after the exposure and confinement of Walker, and something like a month before the army had commenced its retrograde movement, as described in the foregoing chapter. Walker, after the first paroxysm of his rage was over, settled himself down to think. Although he had shown a bold front at first, his final conviction drove from his heart all resolution, and he evinced the most abject cowardice, the cowardice of conscious guilt, which makes the strongest tremble. But Walker was not a man to sit quietly in his cell and submit to his fate. His mind having been settled in the conviction that certain death would follow, he began to form his plans of action. To arrive at any definite conclusion was no easy matter, as he was chained and a double guard placed around his quarters. Yet he had hope. Time was given, and all might yet be right. He learned that he was not to be tried by a division court-martial, but would be removed to St. Louis in order that a general court might act upon his case. He also learned that it would be at least a month before the army would take up its march. Thus he had time precious to him, for like all shrewd villains, he had his confederates, even in the army as well as out of it, and to these he now looked for his bodily safety. It was the 3rd night of his incarceration, that springing to his feet he listened intently. There were 3 distinct taps on the door. "The rescuers, the gang, I'm saved," he muttered, as he gave 3 taps on the door in response. "What's the word?" was asked from the outside. "CSA and the bars," answered Walker. "And you?" "Good. Union against oppression." "Tonight?" asked Walker with eagerness. "No. The pal on the other side ain't for Union. Can't before day after tomorrow. Jim goes on then, and though it ain't my turn, I think I can get pony number 2 drunk, and the job can be done. I'll try." "Be cautious. Trust no one without the word. It was the neglect on my part, thinking it all right to demand the words, which brought me into this scrape." The rounds approached, and the sentinel was relieved. Nothing of importance transpired in camp for the next 3 days. An unusual quiet prevailed. It is true there was much talk upon the subject of the attempted murder, and many expressions of bitterness against Walker. Some even went so far as to suggest the hanging of that wretch before the army left Springfield, lest he should escape. None were more vehement than a repulsive-looking soldier known throughout camp as Ugly Jim. He stated that he had been on guard only a few nights before in front of the prisoners' quarters, and that he had every reason to believe Walker was trying to escape, adding that he wished he had been satisfied of the fact, as he would have been glad of an opportunity to put a bullet through the murderous scoundrel. The party had been drinking freely and had become exceedingly communicative. One of the soldiers, whose post was number 1 on guard duty that night, that is, in front of the prisoner's door, swore he would shoot Walker if he could find any pretext. "You have no spite against him," exclaimed Ugly Jim, "and I have. Let me take the matter in hand. I will stand your guard, and if the villain attempts to move, I'll riddle him sure as Potosi lead mines." "Enough said. I'm on the second relief. I go on at 7 and off at 9, again at 12 and off at 2. This will be your time. Good. I shall be on hand." Ugly Jim then approached the tent of Miss Hayward, and requested an audience alone with that lady. It so happened that she was alone, Alabama having gone to visit her husband, and Sally being at the time strolling through the camp with Nettleton. "If you wish to learn all the particulars about your brother, I think you can do so," said Jim, in a tone of great kindness. "Oh? In what manner?" asked Miss Hayward eagerly. "I don't exactly know, but I will tell you what I do know. You see, I am on guard tonight from 12 till 2, over the cell of Walker. I don't like the villain, anyway, but he told me if I would get you to come to him, he would tell you all he knows of the matter." "Certainly I will go. Call Alabama, and we will go together at once." "I will," answered Jim, as he turned to depart. Then, pausing, he added, "Miss Hayward, now I recollect that Walker said you must come alone. He declared he would not commit himself by speaking before anyone." "I dare not go alone." "Poor child!" exclaimed Jim, as he wiped his eyes. "Do you think you can be alone when this old soldier, as folks call Ugly Jim, is near you? I know my face is ugly, but I don't think my heart is. Besides, you won't see the wretch himself. You will only talk to him through a crack between the logs, and I shall be as close to you as Walker will allow. Of course he won't let me hear what he says, but I shan't let you be out of my sight, so there will be no danger." "Why can we not go at once?" asked Miss Hayward. "Because I don't go on post till 12 o'clock, and the other guard wouldn't let you speak to him." "Then I will come at 12:15, and I shall rely upon you for protection." "You do that, miss, and I really think you do right. I know Walker is a very bad man, but he has got to die, and maybe he wants to make a confession to relieve his mind and to ask your pardon. And I always think it best to give a dying man a chance to relieve his mind and confess." "You may expect me." Jim bowed and left the tent. 12 o'clock came. The guard was relieved, and Ugly Jim had taken the place of his sick friend in front of Walker's prison. All was quiet, save the clanking of a chain, a few hurried whispers, and the opening and closing of a heavy door, which sounds were in close proximity to Walker's dungeon. The words "CSA and bars" were answered by "Union against oppression," and 2 dark forms glided to concealment beside the thorn hedge, while the guard remained at the door. The evening dragged slowly along for Miss Hayward. 100 times she had almost resolved to communicate to her friends the fact of her intended visit to Walker, and to ask their advice, and if need be, to request that someone should follow in the distance to lend assistance should any be required. But what had she to fear? Walker was secure in his cell, and one of the faithful guard had promised his protection. Besides, she had promised to go alone. If she did not, it would imply suspicion of an honest soldier. Walker might also ask if she had come entirely unattended, and how could she answer him? Miss Hayward was naturally timid, and by no means self-reliant. When the news of the supposed death of her brother reached her, she was almost paralyzed with grief. But now that hope had filled her heart, she began to nerve herself to the task of unremitting search, even though she must encounter the greatest dangers. The hour of 12 arrived. Closely muffled in a cloak, she crept from her tent, and then paused to listen. She heard nothing, save the slow and regular breathing of the sleepers and the violent beating of her own heart. She started, but her steps seemed to fail her, and she leaned against a tree for support. The thought of her dear brother and the probable unraveling of the mystery which surrounded his attempted assassination and his present fate gave her renewed courage, and she sped onward. In a few moments she had cleared the camp and arrived in the center of the garden, where stood the doomed man's prison. As she neared the door, the guard asked, "Is that you, Miss Hayward?" "It is," came the low response. "Approach, and fear nothing." She had barely reached the threshold when two forms, darting from beneath the hedge, threw a heavy blanket over her head, thus entirely smothering any attempt on her part to give the alarm. Who and what her captors were she could not divine, or what might be their purpose. Strange to say, her reason did not forsake her. She felt herself borne rapidly along, but not a word was spoken. It appeared to her that hours passed by, and she even longed to hear some word uttered which might give a clue to the intentions of those in whose power she was, or to throw some light upon the subject as to whom her captors were. The blanket, which was very heavy, almost causing suffocation, had been removed and a lighter one substituted. At length the parties halted, and seating themselves upon the ground, the covering was removed, and Miss Hayward was permitted to gaze around her. Her eyes first met those of Captain Walker. She shuddered and turned away. Then, glancing at his two companions, she at once recognized Ugly Jim, and a person known in camp as Stupid Dick, both of whom had served as Union soldiers for a long time under Walker. As her eyes met those of Ugly Jim, she exclaimed, "Oh, you will protect me." A laugh was the only reply. "I trust Miss Hayward will permit me to become her protector," said Walker, in an assumed tone of kindness. Miss Hayward did not reply, but gazed around her. She was in a wild spot. She was seated beside a lovely stream of water in a deep valley, while high on either hand were ragged hills or mountains. She knew the country for at least 10 or 12 miles from Springfield in all directions was quite level, and she judged she must be near the Ozark country, the first range of whose ridges she had frequently seen from that point. "Does not the lovely Miss Hayward deign a reply to her most devoted lover?" asked Walker. "What was your purpose in tearing me from my friends and conveying me here?" asked Miss Hayward. "A pardonable one, I think. My life was forfeited in the Federal camp, and personal interest required me to depart. I could not think of leaving without you, and so I resorted to a little stratagem. My love for you must plead my excuse. But I have told you, Captain Walker, that I could not love you. Do you suppose, after what has transpired, that I could entertain any other feeling toward you than detestation?" "I am aware of that. But when you know me better, I am sure you will consent to reward my devotion. I am going to convey you to your brother." "Then I will thank you, at least," exclaimed Miss Hayward. "Nothing else?" She shuddered. "I must be plain with you," continued Walker. "I am not what I have seemed to be while with the Federals. I am a colonel in the Confederate Army, but I accepted a commission in the so-called Union Army that I might furnish information to my generals. Or, if you like the term better, you may call me a spy. These two soldiers have been with me for the same purpose, and we are not alone. There are now in the Army of the Mississippi over 300 privates and over 20 officers who pretend loyalty to the Federal cause, and I think when his sister has become the wife of Captain Walker or Colonel Brown, he may be induced to join us." "Will you take me to my brother?" "On one condition, I will." "And this condition?" "Miss Hayward, I love you with all the ardor of my soul. You have become necessary to my very existence, are a part of my life. When you spurned me, it drove me frantic, and I am so now. Beware. Oh, beware how you turn this heart, which is yet pure so far as you are concerned, into a hell of furies. Pity me. Oh, dear Miss Hayward, pity me. But my brother, what of him? I will tell you of your brother when you have answered my questions. Proceed, sir. Do not speak so coldly. I will be frank with you. Your brother is a prisoner, not in the Confederate camp, but in a secure place, on the very stream beside which you are now sitting. The murmuring and singing of these very waters will, ere 2 hours, greet his ears with the same strain. Warble those strains to which I have so often listened while in camp, and which stirred my soul, and they will be borne direct to your brother's hearing, to relieve his brain perhaps from the insanity which now enchains him. Insanity, echoed Mammy. My brother's insane. He is a raving maniac, and but one thing can restore him. Oh, wretched, horrible news! What can I do to save my brother? You are the only person who can save him. Nor is the task a hard one. Only a few miles from here is a Confederate camp. A chaplain is in attendance. He will perform the ceremony which will make you irrevocably and securely mine. Go with me. Become my wife. And tomorrow I will take you to your brother, and we will not only restore his shackled feet to liberty, but his shattered senses to reason. We alone can do it. Can you assume the responsibility of a refusal?" Miss Hayward remained silent for a few moments, and then gazed alternately at the three villains. An unnatural fire lit up her eyes. At length she said, "Captain Walker, I do not know, but you are even now deceiving me. You may not know anything about where my brother is." "Ask these soldiers," replied Walker. Miss Hayward turned her eyes upon them. "The captain speaks right," answered Jim. "He does know where your brother is. He is crazy and is chained in the—" "Silence!" commanded Walker. "Do you believe Miss Mammy?" "I must believe the worst," answered Miss Hayward. "Soldiers," she added, turning to the soldiers, "do you believe in the truth of Captain Walker's profession of love for me?" "I should like to think why not," replied Jim doggedly. "Nobody could help loving you. Even I loves you, but I know it ain't no use, and so I don't say nothing." "What have you to say?" asked Mammy, turning to the other soldier. "Lord, Miss Mammy, I always loved you, but stupid Dick never thinks of such as you, and so I acted mean just to spite." "Gentlemen," cried Miss Hayward, springing to her feet, "listen to me. You have wronged me deeply by aiding this wretched villain, your captain, to abduct me. I despise, loathe him, and sooner than become his wife, I would permit my brother to die as he is, for I know that he would curse me were I to save him at such a sacrifice. It will be but death, and I shall suffer very little, for my brother's pure soul will scarce have taken its flight, ere mine will follow." "Miss Hayward—" "Silence, Captain Walker. Soldiers, you have human hearts, and this man has not. I appeal to you, save me. Find my brother and return him safely, and I promise to pay you $1,000 each. If I fail to do this, I swear by the hope of heaven that I will become the wife of one of you, the choice to be decided by lots between you." These words acted like an electric shock upon the soldiers. They sprung to their feet and confronted Walker. But he had anticipated the effects of her words and stood sword and revolver in hand. "You would play me false?" demanded Walker fiercely. "Guess I would," replied Jim. "Take that, then," yelled Walker. The report of a pistol echoed through the valley, and Jim fell without so much as a groan. "And how do you decide?" asked Walker, turning and pointing his revolver toward Dick. "I was only going to help you. I ain't no such foolish cuss as to think of marrying a fine lady like that. I'm all right." "Prove yourself so, and you shall have your 1,000. Deceive me, and you share his fate." As Walker spoke, he stepped to a clump of thick bushes and drew a small boat from concealment. Handing Miss Hayward to a seat, and preceded by Dick, Walker entered, and the little craft swept gently along with the current down the stream. They had proceeded but a short distance when Miss Hayward burst forth and sung a wild, thrilling air, which echoed far and wide through the valley and across the hills. There was something strangely beautiful in her song, and something still more strange in her actions. As each strain echoed over the hills and gave back the ringing notes, she would start and listen attentively, and a gleam of joy would lighten up her pale face, upon which a shade of disappointment would almost as soon appear. Her hearers sat in silence and in apparent wonder. "Those words are significant," exclaimed Walker. "What is their import?" "She's going mad, too, I opine," exclaimed Dick. "Better let her go." "Silence!" cried Walker. "Miss Hayward, do you think your voice will penetrate his retreat?" She made no answer, but as the little boat swept onward, ever and anon the same words and the same wild music broke the stillness of the forest, now sounding like a wail of sorrow, and then becoming almost hushed in hopeful expectation. The words had the appearance of being extemporized for the occasion, and were as follows: "Break those fetters I am calling, listen only to my song. I am waiting, loved one, waiting, I have waited oh so long. Give but one fond word to cheer me, as I pray and hope and weep. Let thy echo say thou'rt near me, as my vigils thus I keep. Echo, as along I glide, this my song, from thy retreat, and I'll bound to thy dear side. Are we ever again to meet? Yes, a seraph from on high whispers to me, thou art nigh. Friends are waiting, friends are near, dearest brother, do not fear." End of Chapter 8. Recording by andrelevy, Lisbon, Portugal.
Chapter 9. A Prisoner of the Mill. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Christian Bilke. Prisoner of the Mill by Harry Hazelton. Chapter 9. The Pursuit. The Perilous Situation. Important Information. It was 2:00 in the morning, nearly 2 hours after Mrs. Hayward had been seized and borne from the camp by Walker and his confederates. The guard relief had commenced his rounds. The first post visited was that in front of the door where Walker had been confined. A glance revealed the prisoner's escape. The chain which had secured the door was lying upon the steps, and the door itself was slightly ajar. Walker and both the sentinels had disappeared. The long roll was at once beaten, and the camp aroused. Scarce had the lines been formed when it was announced that Mrs. Hayward also had disappeared. The grief of her friends and the rage of the soldiers knew no bounds, and many was the oath of a terrible retribution uttered against the fiend who had spread such desolation and sorrow in her path. It was but a few moments before squads of cavalry were dashed in every direction in pursuit. There was but little doubt as to how the escape had been effected. The disappearance of the guard convinced all that they were in league with Walker, but in what manner they had gained possession of Miss Hayward was a mystery. No one had detected anything unusual in her manner the evening before, and she had retired at her usual hour. It was thought, however, that the parties would not have taken any main road, as the pickets would have given the alarm. They could not have had more than 2 hours the start, as everything was all right when the 12 o'clock relief went on post, and at 2 o'clock the escape was discovered. If Walker had to walk through the fields in order to avoid the pickets, it would have taken at least 2 hours to clear them. It was most likely that once outside the lines, friends and horses would be procured. Still, the distance would not be so great that our horsemen hoped to overtake them, and so they set off with a good will in various directions. "Are you not going to accompany us?" asked Lieutenant Wells of Nettleton, who was seated on the ground, looking gloomy and sullen. "Not by a darn sight," answered Nettleton doggedly. "And why not?" asked Wells. "You go long and let me alone," he answered sharply. There was no time for words, and the squadron departed. The night passed, during which Nettleton was bitter in his self-reproach for not watching closer, and would not hold conversation with any person. As the first dawn of the day became visible, Nettleton was seen crawling upon his hands and knees, in front of the former prison of Walker, and through the garden, toward the west. His movements were watched with considerable interest, as all had begun to respect him for his sagacity, in his peculiar way. At length he returned to his tent, and, without speaking, carefully examined his double-barrel shotgun, a beautiful piece which he had picked up upon the Wilson Creek battleground, and had been permitted to retain. This he loaded, then, taking a large artillery ammunition bag, he went directly to the tent of Adjutant Hinton. Removing the lid of a mini-ball ammunition box, he filled this pouch with cartridges. His next move was to place some provisions in his haversack. Then he started. "Where are you going, William?" asked Mrs. Hinton. "Them boots," he replied, pointing in the direction he had just taken in his hands and knees examination. "What do you mean?" "Why, them boots as had 2 hearts on the soles went that way, and I'm going to follow if I go to thunder." He waited to hear no more or to speak more, but bounded off to the westward. He had been gone perhaps in an hour, when Fall Leaf, the Indian scout already referred to, entered the camp. He was soon made aware of the state of things. Fall Leaf was deeply attached to Captain Hayward, and more especially so to his fair sister, Mamie. The scout had been but a short time in camp when he had given to the general all the information he possessed with regard to the enemy. This done, he followed on the trail fast as possible. For several hours Nettleton kept on his course, now striking the main road for the purpose of searching for fresh tracks, then taking to the woods again to avoid observation. Several times he came upon the well-known footprints, and a bitter exclamation would escape him. He kept his course, more from the judgment he had formed as to his direction Walker had taken, than from the numerous impressions of his boots. He was ascending a sharp and ragged hill, so heavily covered with the thorn bush and small scrub oak peculiar to that country, that his progress was rendered very difficult. Suddenly a figure darted in front of him and concealed itself among the thick undergrowth. Nettleton brought his gun to the shoulder and called out, "None of that skulking, darn ye! Come out and fair fight!" "Ugh!" responded the voice, and Fall Leaf bounded to his side. "Oh, it's you, is it, Mr. Injun? Well, I'm darn glad you've come, for you can hunt these snarly woods better than me. Any news?" "You kill 'em, eh?" "I shall kill 'em, if I only get a bead on the critter." "You did kill 'em? Kill who?" "Dead soldier, there." Fall Leaf indicated that he meant further on. "Come on, Injun," said Nettleton. He reached the summit of the hill which overlooked the valley below, and, led by Fall Leaf, began its descent. They soon reached the stream, and the Indian pointed to the dead body. Nettleton gazed upon it a moment, and then said, "Darn me if it ain't the very feller what run away last night. Walker has been here, sure." He commenced his search at once. He found footprints in the sand, and among them that of a lady, judging from its small size. The Indian had also been taking observations. Returning from a clump of bushes, he said to Nettleton, "See, canoe, too, Whitebird, so." Here Fall Leaf indicated by action that 2 men had drawn a boat from the concealment of the thicket, had entered it, as indicated by the tracks in the sand, and had proceeded downstream. "Well, they've got rid of one scoundrel, anyway. It will only be man to man, and I feel myself to be a match for any dozen such skunks as that Walker. They can't have much the start." Both Fall Leaf and Nettleton walked rapidly forward along the bank of the stream. At length, and it was almost a simultaneous movement of the part of each, they stopped, and bending forward, held their ears close to the ground. "By thunder!" cried Nettleton, "that's her voice." "Whitebird caged. She no sing," replied Fall Leaf. "Ain't you a darn fool? Don't you know that Whitebird, as you call her, has got a right to expect some of her friends will be after her, and so she sings that they may hear her voice echoing up and down among these hills, and know where to find her. Ugh, good, White Hunter, no fool." Again the voice was heard, and this time so clearly as to leave no doubt upon the mind of our hero as to who the singer was. Like a deer he bounded off in the direction indicated. The music died away, and all was still, but the 2 men paused not. Upon a sudden they emerged into an open field of about 4 acres, near the center of which were 2 large stacks of hay. The river at this point took a bend, and the 2 pursuers ducked directly across the open space. Just as they reached the stacks, Fall Leaf darted close in to the base of one of them, taking the attitude of a listener and making a significant sign to Nettleton. "What is it?" asked Nettleton. "Hark! Soldiers! Horses! Whoa! Hark!" Nettleton listened attentively and then said, "There may be a party of soldiers coming. It may be our men who have been in search of the miss, of Whitebird, but it is well enough to keep close. It may be the rebels merely moving camp, and if this is so, Mamie must be with them. The sounds are coming nearer. Crawl under the hay, Redskin, way under, out of sight." This was effected with some difficulty, when a party of rebel guerrillas, numbering about 60, rode into the field and proceeded to form their camp directly in the vicinity of the haystacks, under which the 2 men were concealed. "Well, I guess we've got into the right shop," said Nettleton to Fall Leaf. "We are cooped up here close enough for a walk, but Miss Mame must be with this crowd, and when dark comes, we can scout around and see what to do. Lay quiet, Injun. White Hunter knows. Make good Injun." The day dragged slowly away. Toward night a party of the rebels came for forage for their horses, but the hay was tumbled from the top of the stack, and our friends were not discovered. The guerrillas' conversation, however, was listened to with great interest by Nettleton. "So Colonel Brown, or Walker, as he is called, came within 1 of being done for in the camp of the Yanks at Springfield?" "Yes, so he says." "What the devil does he want with the gal?" "Oh, some love affair, of course." "The gal was happy, for she was singing like a nightingale." "Oh, yes. No doubt she was dazzled by the prospect of being a colonel's wife." "Who is she?" "Don't know." "My eyes, but she is a beauty." "So much the better for him." "Where was he going with her?" "Oh, below, taking her to her brother, I believe." "Where is that?" "Down in the old mill." This was all the conversation heard by the adventurers, but the rebel troops did not move again until late in the next day, and our friends were compelled to remain quiet. They had learned sufficient to convince them that Miss Hayward was not with this band of rebels, but was being borne still further from them. They cursed the chance which had thus entrapped them, and prevented their overtaking the captive at once. Still, they resolved to keep up the pursuit, and they had learned that at some mill the lady was to be conveyed, and that her brother was there. Patiently they waited until they could emerge and finish their journey. End of Chapter 9.
Chapter 10 of Prisoner of the Mill. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Ahmed El-Sherif. Prisoner of the Mill by Harry Hazelton. Chapter 10. Hayward. It is time the reader was enlightened somewhat as to the fate of Captain Hayward. The wound he had received the night of the attempted assassination was severe but by no means fatal. The loss of blood had rendered him very weak, and for some time he remained insensible. At the moment the blow was inflicted, there was, upon the other bank of the river, and watching the Federals, a squad of rebel cavalry scouts. The water into which Hayward was thrown soon revived the wounded man. He was seen by this band and carried to the house of an officer of the Confederate Army, not half a mile from the spot. Here his wound was dressed. It was not long before an order reached them, signed by Colonel Brown, to convey him to the camp of Colonel Price at Ozark. This order was low, and immediately after the Federals left Grand Prairie, a boat was procured and Hayward placed in it, but half conscious, he reached the Ozark Bridge at the critical juncture already described in the chapter referring to the interview between Nettie Morton and Charles Campbell, and the interruption by Colonel Price, the rescue of Nettie by Fall Leaf, the approach of the Union forces, and the resolve of Charles Campbell to save the wounded captain. It was at the moment when Price was in pursuit of the Indian that Campbell, taking advantage of his absence and observing the approach of the Federals, hastily penned the note previously referred to and then pushed off with the boat down the stream in order to effect his escape with the prisoner. He began to hope that success would crown his efforts. The battle favored his flight. All that day and the night following, he pursued his course. It was his purpose to follow the Gasconade until he had reached the point nearest Rolla, where he supposed he would be free from the roving bands of rebels who were so numerous in the vicinity of Springfield. But his hopes were doomed to disappointment. Colonel Price, anticipating the direction he had taken, immediately dispatched one Lieutenant Lewis, a most tireless wretch, with a squad of 10 men to intercept Campbell and the prisoner captain. Just as the morning dawned, Campbell saw the pursuing party approaching. Pulling for the shore, he lifted Captain Hayward in his arms and bore him into a mill which stood near at hand. There he quickly concealed his charge in an upper loft and returned to meet the rebels. He stated he had been captured by a party of the Federals and conveyed to that point, and that they had there released him upon his parole of honor. This story was generally believed, although one of the band appeared to be incredulous and left his fellows for a pretended search. Not observing his absence, the remainder of the rebel band returned without him, taking care, however, that Campbell was not left behind. When this person entered the mill, he found Hayward leaning upon his elbow, quite conscious, but too weak to move. He paused before the wounded man and was silent. Hayward saw and recognized him. "Are friends near?" was his feeble question. "I am the only friend you have got in these parts, and I reckon as how Ugly Jim ain't just the man you want to see." "You are one of my own men," returned Hayward. "That's a bent as well admit of some argument. As the lawyers say, I may be your man when I'm in Springfield, but you're my man now, so don't kick up any fuss, and after I have made you fast, I'll tell you the rest, ha ha," he muttered to himself, "but Walker shall pay me well for this." Saying this, the rebel rascal left the mill. Not far from this mill, in a rich log hut, lived an old woman who gloried in the title of Crazy Madge, and of whom the rude backwoods people of the vicinity stood in fear, as it was almost universally believed among them that she was possessed of the devil. She told fortunes with great correctness, and employed the most singular modes in doing this, such as burning powder and strange incense, and the uttering of fearful imprecations and unearthly sounds. The mill was owned by one Bohannon, a captain of Confederate guerrillas. Since the commencement of the war, it had not been in operation except on rare occasions. About 1 mile above Bohannon's mill, there was another mill of smaller dimensions, which had formerly been owned by a thorough Union man, who, becoming a refugee, had abandoned this mill also. So when the residents in that region or any of the straggling rebel bands had occasion to grind their grain, they always went to the upper mill, more especially as it was believed that Crazy Madge had taken full possession of the lower one after its proprietor left, and that being occupied in sacrilegious rites, it was very generally believed to be unsafe to venture in that vicinity. Even the most reckless and hardy of the guerrillas held the spot in awe and avoided it in all times. Madge was seated in her own dough when Campbell entered the mill with Hayward in his arms. She watched him closely, but uttered no word. She saw him emerge and meet the rebel band. She watched their departure and then discovered the newcomer, Grouse Green, as he was known. When he came forth from the mill, Madge still was seated in the cabin doorway smoking her pipe. She did not even raise her eyes or pretend the least consciousness of his presence, until with a rude slap upon her shoulder, he said, Come, old woman, I want you." The old creature pretended not the least surprise, but raising her snake-like eyes to those of the speaker, she said, "That the son of Belial wished to know his fate. I need not the aid of my magic charms to point it out to me. In less than a month the most horrible death— Bah, you old crone! I'd dash your brain out for a copper, you infernal croaking old buzzard. I don't come to have my fortune told, but I want you to serve me, and you shall have gold. Do you hear, old woman? No fooling now, and gold is yours." Gold? It is the master key to the human heart. And what am I to do for gold? My bidding. First, I want a set of chains. Have you such things in your infernal den? "You can have them for gold," she exclaimed, tottering to a closet and rattling the cold iron. "I always keep them. It is necessary to my trade. Now for the bargain, old hag. You saw me enter that mill just now. Well, there is a captain confined, or will be confined, before I leave him in the upper loft. He will be fastened. You must feed him daily, just enough to keep life in him. I will give you 100 to start upon, more money than you ever saw, old woman, and when I return, if you have well done your duty as keeper, I will give you another 100. Will you be faithful and keep the prisoner in safety from rescue?" "I swear it by my magic heart." "Bah, blast your heart. Swear it by the gold you will receive, and I'll believe you. But come." Green re-entered the mill, followed by old Madge. He seized the helpless Hayward and bore him to an upper loft. There he fettered him with the chains. "And now I shall leave you here until we can attend to you at a more convenient time," he muttered as he gazed exultingly upon Hayward. He was about to leave him alone. "Stay but a moment," cried the wounded man. "Tell me of my sister. She has become the wife of Colonel Brown, of the Confederate Army, or, as you know him, Captain Walker of the Federals." "Liar!" cried Hayward. "But no, I will not use such terms now. Do you know who struck the blow which so nearly deprived me of life? Yes, it is William Nettleton. He is also enlisted in the service of Walker, and I will tell you more. In 2 days after you disappeared, Lieutenant Wells was hung for your murder. Your sister fled with Walker, who pretended the greatest friendship for her. I performed the ceremony, and tonight they are not 3 miles from you." Hayward had become insensible and sunk to the floor. Green saw this, and motioning to the old woman, they left him alone. "That is the game I want you to play," said Green as they emerged from the mill. "Of course, all I have told him is false, but I want you to carry it out, because Colonel Price wishes it as well as Walker, and as he is a most dangerous man to our cause, I don't care how poorly he gets along. It would be a good thing for us if he could never take the field again, so see that you do your duty." Madge received her money and agreed to follow all the instructions he had given her. Green now returned at once to the camp and reported to Walker. It was just before the decision of the court-martial had been given, and that officer was free not only from restraint, but from anything which had as yet assumed a definite form. He was delighted with the intelligence, and resolved to take advantage of it soon as Wells could be thoroughly crushed. End of Chapter 10.
Chapter 11 of Prisoner of the Mill. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by K. Hand. Prisoner of the Mill by Harry Hazelton. Chapter 11. The Prison, the Wheel Room, Caged, the Life and Death Struggle. We left Miss Hayward in the little boat, in the custody of Walker and Stupid Dick. For several hours they sped rapidly onward with the stream. They encountered the party of rebels of which we have made mention, but as Walker, or Colonel Brown, was the officer highest in rank, No one attempted to interfere with his project. The boat kept its course until it came upon a broad flat which appeared to be some 5 or 6 miles in length, and perhaps 1 in breadth. This, Walker informed Miss Hayward, was the Valley of Bohannan. "And," said he, "your brother is confined in yonder mill." Miss Hayward gazed a moment upon the structure, and then burst forth in the same wild strain she had sung so frequently during her boat voyage. "It is folly for you to attempt to attract his notice by your voice. He is a close prisoner and a maniac, and nothing but your constant presence and attention will ever cause his reason to return." "What do you intend to do with him and myself?" asked Miss Hayward. "I intend to take you to your brother. I intend to let you see him in a wretched garret, with no hope of recovery, or of even life, unless you come to his aid. I intend to permit you to gaze upon this scene, but not even to speak with your brother or to assist him in any manner, until you are my wife. Then you shall be free to attend to all his wants, to provide for his comfort, to restore him to reason, to life, and to liberty." Miss Hayward bent her head upon her hands and wept. "I will not ask for your final decision now," continued Walker. "I will wait until you have seen your brother, which will be in a few minutes." The boat was drawn to the shore, and Walker, turning to Dick, said, "I will dispense with you now. Go to Joe's farm. Follow my instructions as to storing the house with provisions, and at least 1 comfortable bed. Miss Hayward, it is a beautiful place of which I speak, and, in case of your refusal to perform all that I wish voluntarily, or to save your brother, I shall be compelled to take advantage of a friend's mansion, in case I cannot effect my escape with you to Arkansas. This I doubt being able to do, and more I don't know that I shall run the risk, as I am only a subordinate, and some of my superiors might order your release. You perceive that I intend to make sure of my prize now that she is in my keeping. As my wife she will be permitted all proper liberty, but until you are such, by your own voluntary act, I must keep you safely from approach by anyone." Dick had left his master. Walker and Miss Hayward arrived at the log hut adjoining the mill and entered it. Old Madge was there, but she looked pale and frightened. "Come here, Madge. What is the matter?" asked Walker. "The devil's broke loose," replied Madge, trembling violently. "Come, don't be alarmed. I am Walker. I am the one who sent you the $100 to keep the man safely. You have done so, I hope. He has just broken loose and run into the woods." "How did that happen?" "Oh, he heard a voice singing outside, and in his fever delirium said it was an angel calling him to heaven, and he burst from his room and rushed up yonder." Walker and the old woman conversed together in undertones for a few moments, when he turned to Miss Hayward and said, "Your brother, in his delirium, broke his chains, and is at large in the mountains. He will not return here, and I think it doubtful if I can find him. He will most likely make his way to the Federal camps. But come with me, you shall see where he was confined, and then learn my further intentions." Walker seized the unresisting maiden by the arm, and drew her up into the mill. Up the dirty stairs she went, and finally entered the room, or attic, where the unfortunate brother had been detained prisoner. She shuddered as she gazed around her. "Now," said Walker, "I will show you your room, the one you shall occupy until you are Mrs. Colonel Brown." He drew her still further on, and opened a massive door which grated upon its hinges. She gazed in. It was a small apartment into which the carpenter usually entered when he wished to repair the great water wheel which set the mill in motion. This room, or rather aperture, was of construction unlike any apartment intended for occupancy. There was a platform about 10 feet in width, which formed the only flooring. Then a great opening beyond, through which the main wheel extended upward about 8 or 10 feet, entirely filling the opening in the floor. Any man confined in this apartment would find little difficulty in effecting his escape, provided he was an expert swimmer, and the mill not in motion. But the manner in which an escape must be effected would be as follows. When the mill was running, the wheel being then in motion, the water was thrown in large quantities in every part of the room, and its inmate could scarcely prevent drowning by catching his breath at intervals. To attempt to spring into the wheel, which was formed something like the wheel of a wagon, the rim or tire, however, being about 20 feet in breadth, with crevices or brackets for catching the water which propelled it, and the braces answering as spokes bearing proportion to the rim, would most assuredly be dashed in pieces in the attempt to gain the interior. But once there, he would be whirled around and round until he could gather his energies for a jump when that portion of the wheel in which he was perched was down, or nearest the bed of the stream. To leap out into the river would be a task equally perilous to that of springing in. When the wheel was not in motion, one could step into the opening, slide down the rim with great ease, spring into the water, and gain the shore in a moment. Miss Hayward gazed into this room or vault with a fainting, sickening sensation, but she did not speak. It appeared as if hope had almost left her heart, now that she found her brother gone, and she nerved herself for any fate that might overtake her. It was, as we have stated, late in the afternoon before the rebels encamped around the stack where Nettleton and Fall Leaf were secreted, took their departure, and up to that time the two faithful pursuers were unable to venture forth. At last all was safe, and they emerged from their concealment and gazed around them. No living person was to be seen. A meal was hastily prepared, after partaking of which they resumed their journey at a rapid rate. All night they plodded along, taking care to see that no mill was passed upon the route. As the morning dawned, they found themselves in an open space of considerable extent, and close by the stream was a mill. This was carefully examined in every nook and corner, but nothing was found. They made inquiry of a woman living in a cabin near the spot, and learned that, a mile further on, was another mill of larger dimensions, belonging to one Bohannon. For this place they immediately bent their steps. Arriving, they were met by old Madge, who immediately commenced her mummeries in order to divert their attention. The Indian gazed upon her a moment, as if half in awe and half in fear, but Nettleton did not pause, and exclaimed, "Come along, Injun, I expect here's the place." They entered the mill. The Indian remained at the door to prevent any egress, while Nettleton commenced his search. Up and down, high and low, the search was prosecuted. Walker, being then within, had observed the approach of Nettleton and the Indian. His first impulse was to fire upon them, but he knew if his aim proved inaccurate he might then bid adieu to life, and so he resolved to resort to stratagem. He seized Miss Hayward and sprung into a wheat bin close by the door of the wheel room we have described. He soon buried himself and his prisoner among a lot of old bags, husks, and refuse, and cautioned her to remain quiet, as a band of Kansas cutthroats, who regarded neither the life or the person of a pretty woman, were at hand. This had the effect to keep Miss Hayward quiet. Nettleton had completed his search. The lower floor of the mill had been carefully scrutinized, its closets, its bins, except the small one near the wheel room, which had escaped his notice. "I wonder if there's anything under the mill?" queried Nettleton. "I'll call and see if that does any good. Captain! Captain Hayward!" The voice was at once recognized by Miss Hayward, who vainly struggled to reply, but Walker had a handkerchief so tightly over her mouth that she could produce no sound. At length, by a desperate effort, she removed his hand and shrieked, "Here, William, here!" "Where? Where?" cried William, as he sprung toward the bin. "In the wheel room!" yelled Walker, smothering his voice so far as to drown the exact direction in which it came. Nettleton bounded into the wheel room, closely followed by the Indian, who now supposed their friends to be found. Quick as lightning, Walker sprung from the bin and slammed the door upon them, bolting it securely. He then started for the mill gate, which, being hoisted, would set the large wheel in motion. As soon as the door was closed upon Nettleton, he rightly suspected treachery, and throwing himself with all his violence against the door, tried to force it, but in vain. "Quick, Injun! Jump into the mill wheel and down into the water." They were about to adopt this plan of escape, when the wheel started with great rapidity, rendering it seemingly impossible to do so. "Now!" yelled Walker, as he seized Miss Mamie and bore her from the mill. "You shall see the folly of opposing me. You shall see how I triumph over all obstacles, and how those who oppose me perish." Inside of the mill and near the door was a quantity of hay and unthreshed grain, stored there for use by some neighboring farmer or guerrilla. Striking a match, Walker lit the inflammable material. In a moment it blazed high and communicated with the woodwork. Walker only waited to see this, and then, almost dragging Miss Hayward along, he reached the river, drew the boat into the stream, and was once more floating with the current. "Look, Miss Mamie, "Is not that a lovely sight?" he cried, pointing to the mill, now thoroughly enveloped in flames. "Nettleton is there, and Fall leaf is there, and they have been brought there by you. They will perish in those flames, and you must be responsible for their murder. When will you learn that it is useless to oppose me, and cease to do so? To submit to my proper and honorable requests is the only way you can save your friends." When Nettleton and Fall leaf found their mode of escape thus cut off, they naturally turned to each other for advice. The water thrown from the wheel so blinded and choked them that they could not hold conversation at all. It was not long before our prisoners became aware of the fact that however disagreeable the water might be, they were likely to be visited by an element, and that very soon, far more disagreeable, under the present circumstances. The flames were seizing upon every part of the mill, and all around them soon became a mass of lurid, destroying light. The rafters, flooring, and upper work threatened to fall at any moment. Still the room in which our friends were confined remained unscathed, surrounded as it was by water. But it must soon yield to the fiery element. The wheel still moved, yet it seemed as if its speed was somewhat lessened. At length Nettleton yelled, "Injun, I'm going. Take your chances." With a bound he sprung into the wheel. He escaped any severe blow, but upon alighting he was tossed and pitched and tumbled over, until at last, catching upon the center bar, he held himself until he had made his calculation as to where his next jump should be. At last he ventured the hazardous leap, and was precipitated into the foaming waters beneath the wheel, which in its revolution struck him lightly, calling forth a grumble or a grunt. But Nettleton battled bravely with the rushing waters, and at length, half dead with suffocation, he crawled upon the bank as the burning rafters of the mill were falling around him. "Wall, I suppose Injun is roasted alive, and I must do the work alone. I'm darned sorry, and I've lost my gum, too. But I ought to be glad that I didn't lose myself. The villain! But won't I roast him, if ever I lay these hands on him." Thus he muttered as he sat for a moment gazing upon the appalling spectacle before him. He then sprung up, and seeing the old woman, at once started for the cabin. Madge met him at the door. "Will you have my services, to tell you truly the fortune that is in store for you?" she asked. "Your services? Yas. I'll have you tell me all about affairs here in this quarter, and if you don't own up everything, I'll put you in this pile of logs and roast you, as sure as you are a she-woman. Do you understand?" "I have but little to reveal of the circumstances to which you refer. The Federal officer was in the mill a prisoner, but escaped in his delirium, and is now somewhere out in the mountain. Walker and the lady were in the mill, but are now out of reach downstream. This is all I know." "And it is enough. Now you just fork over a good Minié musket. I know you have a dozen concealed here for the use of your friends, and all the fixins for settlin' the hash of your friend Captain Walker, for him and me has an account to fix that will require powder and lead, if this bread cutter o' mine don't do the job," he said, handling his bowie knife. Madge only too well read in Nettleton's face the resolute nature of the man, and with scarcely a moment's hesitancy went out of the hut to a hollow tree near by, and produced from thence an armful of arms, made up of shotguns, old-fashioned rifles, and a Minié musket. From these Nettleton selected, after careful scrutiny, a heavy double-barrel squirrel gun. Ammunition was also supplied by the woman without hesitancy, and the pursuer soon found himself equipped in a most formidable manner. "There, old gal, you have done the right thing. It is well that you did, for, sure as lizards, I should have burned you in your pen if you hadn't forked over what I knowed was in your possession. Now good-bye, and behave yourself. If the captain, my captain, I mean, comes back to you, do you be kind to him, for I tell you it is for your best interests to be so. Do you believe that?" "I believe anything you say," replied the old creature, betraying her anxiety to get rid of her visitor. "You do, eh? Well, just keep on thinking so, for I shall, mayhap, want to use you again some of these days. So good-bye, and keep your eyes clean." With this injunction he started again for the river, following the stream for some distance, but finally, for some reason best known to himself, he took to the mountains. Every few moments he would pause and listen, as if a faint sound met his ears, and then continue his journey. After Nettleton had escaped from the mill, Fall leaf began to look around for some other means of escape. He felt sure that Nettleton's leap must be a fatal one, that, if he was not dashed to pieces by the wheel, he would certainly be drowned in the rushing waters. All chance of escape for the poor Indian appeared quite as hopeless. The flames were already hissing around him and curling up the sides of his prison house. The fire had weakened the boards, and, just as the flames were coiling around his form, he made a desperate effort, and burst the siding from the mill. In an instant he sprung through the aperture, although the fiery element presented a formidable obstacle between himself and safety. He alighted, however, with only a few slight bruises, and waiting for nothing, bounded forward. He knew if Walker had continued his journey down the river, he could soon overtake him. For an hour he did not slacken his pace, and finally, in turning a short bend in the river, he beheld the boat. He was about to dash forward to the rescue of Miss Hayward, but he remembered that he had no gun, his only weapon being his sheath knife, while Walker was well armed. He must resort to stratagem. His object was to watch for opportunity, and when Walker should land, or when the boat neared the shore, and the thicket favored the moment, to spring upon him suddenly, and drive the knife to his heart. But the river gradually grew wider, and Walker kept his boat in the center, too far distant from the shore for any attempt for his seizure to prove successful. All that day and all the night following, the boat drifted on with the stream. It was evident Walker was anxious to reach a certain point as quickly as possible. The morning dawned just as the little craft shot past the ford on the Rolla Turnpike, near the Ghost Swamp, a locality of weird interest and novel character. Walker was about to land near a small farmhouse which stood behind a jutting hill, entirely concealed from the main road, but before touching the shore his quick eye caught sight of a dark form creeping cautiously along the bank. At the same moment he discovered 3 horses tied in a thicket only a short distance from the house. Whether they belonged to friend or foe he could not tell, but the fact of seeing the creeping form rendered him cautious, and he immediately pulled for the opposite shore where he landed. "Are you friend or foe to the Confederates?" shouted Walker from the opposite side of the stream. There was no response. "That cursed Dick must have betrayed me," he muttered. "But I will match them yet. Come." He dragged Miss Hayward along up the mountain steep. At length he reached a point of rock which extended far over the valley below. A narrow footway, not more than 10 inches in width, forming a kind of shelf in the rock, led into an immense cavern which is known in that region as the Silver Cave. Just in front of this cave was a large flat rock forming an overhanging platform, but to reach this or the mouth of the cave required great care, as the narrow path was the only manner in which an entrance or exit could be effected. Into this place Walker conveyed Miss Hayward. Walker had, when meeting the rebels 2 days before, provided his boat well with provisions. These he conveyed with him into the cavern. He had not observed, however, that he was followed closely, and that the Indian arrived at the narrow passageway just as the rebel and his prisoner entered the cave. This was so. The Indian crept up as closely as possible and peered over the projecting point which shut Walker from his view. He was observed. "And who are you?" yelled Walker. The Indian was perfectly familiar with the cave. He knew no person could leave it by the narrow shelf or pathway. He could keep himself concealed, and if Walker passed a certain point, before he could bring his gun to bear, he could strike him dead. Walker was a prisoner, with a watchful and relentless keeper. The Indian replied, "Ah, Whitebird! Fall leaf here. Fall leaf save." "Is it indeed my friend, Fall leaf?" cried Miss Hayward, joyfully. "Yes, Fall leaf save you." "Where is William Nettleton?" asked Mamie. "Gone, gone." "Ah, then I have only you to encounter," yelled Walker, "and if the fates favor me I shall triumph. I know the Indian has not thought to provide himself with provisions. I have enough to last us, with care, for 2 weeks, and by that time he will starve, for no Federal fool ever will find me here. He dare not leave in search of help, for I shall then effect my escape. So we will play our hands, and see if I do not hold the trump card. Ha, ha! I can baffle any friend you have, Miss Hayward." "Whitebird, sing," said the Indian. "Yes, I will sing, and as we are now near the main road, someone will be sure to hear me. Me watch, me wait." During the entire passage Miss Hayward had not failed to sing her echo song every few miles, hoping to attract attention and gain assistance. Now that she was so near the public highway, she applied herself anew to the task. Walker made frequent attempts to silence her, but could not do it, as he feared, whenever he turned from his watch, that the Indian would dart in upon him. Some 2 years previous there was a superstitious belief prevailing in that section of Missouri that the spirit of a murdered lady appeared upon the waters of the Gasconade, singing her mournful lays, and gliding in her death skiff along the waters. For some time past nothing had been heard of the lady ghost, but, when the songs of Miss Hayward were heard, the simple inhabitants began to think that the ghost lady had returned, and instead of seeking to gratify their curiosity, were careful to keep as far as possible away. So it proved with regard to the cave, after the singing commenced. Several days passed, and no succor appeared. The Indian kept faithful watch, and so did Walker, that he might not be taken by surprise. Walker, becoming convinced that Fall leaf had no gun, several times endeavored to bring his own to bear upon his vigilant foe, but this he could not do without placing himself in a dangerous position. Both were weary for want of sleep, and both would occasionally sink into a fitful slumber, but so intent was each upon his object that the slightest movement would rouse the sleepers, and each stand ready to meet his foe. But as Fall leaf had no food, he began to grow faint, his firm frame began visibly to weaken. Still, he determined to maintain his watch as long as life should last. End of chapter 11.
Chapter 12 of Prisoner of the Mill. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Christian Bilke. Prisoner of the Mill by Harry Hazelton. Chapter 12. The Mountain Adventure. Let us return to the army, which we left near Lebanon. The main force was to continue its march onward towards Rolla, while a battalion of infantry, a section of artillery, and a company of cavalry struck to the west of the main road, and started for the point from which the messenger had arrived. It was a weary march, as the troops already had proceeded 20 miles that day, but the dreadful atrocities related as having been committed by the guerrillas fired the hearts of the brave soldiers, and they pressed forward with a will. The troops at last reached the scene of the outrages, in the place known as Bohannan Mills Valley. The deeds of blood and horror had not been exaggerated by the messenger. Women had been murdered in their beds, old men were lying stiff and cold, with their brains beaten out, and children, helpless and weeping, were clinging to their dead bodies or wandering distractedly around. The battalion which had been sent to this valley was the one to which Lieutenant Wells and Adjutant Hinton belonged. Wells was still suffering from the terrible anxiety of mind which he had recently undergone, but did not permit his own troubles to interfere with his discharge of duty. The troops camped in the little valley to collect the scattered families, whose remaining members it was determined to take along with the army in its retreat. Soon word was brought by a mountaineer that the guerrillas still were infesting the mountain, while the flames of a burning mill seen below seemed to give evidence that the miscreants still were at their work of blood. This decided the officers to scour the mountain, if possible, to force the rebels to a fight, for there was not a man in the Union ranks who did not pant for a chance to meet those dastards, who, under the protecting folds of the Confederate flag, committed atrocities at which humanity stood aghast. Wells was soon at the head of a strong party of dismounted dragoons, and with them struck off for the hills back of the burning mill. A weary march was brought to a sudden halt by a deep water gully, over which no perceptible ford offered a passage. Up and down it Wells passed to reconnoiter. It was an ugly spot to be caught in by a wily foe, and the troops were so disposed as to guard against a surprise. The men kept close under cover of the dense undergrowth, so as not to betray their position should the guerrillas come upon them. Lieutenant Wells and Adjutant Hinton were proceeding up the watercourse, when a rattle of firearms arrested their attention. It was evident some kind of a conflict was taking place over the stream. The volley was not, however, answered by a return. Only a single shot was heard, and then a wild, frenzied shout, as if of maddened men. After a brief interval, another shot was heard, and a second paralyzed howl was followed by shouts and curses, plainly heard by the two anxious senior officers. "It must be the guerrillas after the poor Unionists who have fled to the mountain," said Hinton. "Our men must not be idle when such work is going on. You stay here, Wells, to watch further, while I go back to bring up our boys." Hinton hurried away, while Wells crept forward to the very edge of the deep but narrow gully beyond which the sound of conflict were heard. Hardly had he secured a spot for observation, ere he was startled by the crash of the undergrowth and the voices of men not 10 rods away. On toward the lieutenant's place of concealment came the pursued and pursuers. The first was but a single man, whom Wells several times detected gliding from tree to tree, keeping under cover like an experienced woodsman. He was closely pursued by a band of guerrillas, all dismounted, who were making the hills echo with their demonic yells. Slowly the fugitive retired, holding the foes at bay by his sagacious maneuvers. Wells became intently excited over the scene, and resolved to rush at once to the brave fellow's aid, but there lay before him an impassable gulf over which few men could bound. Finally the hunted man struck the gully, and saw at a glance that his retreat was cut off. The enemy saw it too, for they set up a shout of commingled derision and pleasure, which so maddened the fugitive that he yelled, "Laugh away, you dark skunks! I'll make more than one of your dirty carcasses food for the crows before I go under." And suiting the words to action, he fired 2 successive shots from what, apparently, was a double-barreled fowling piece. 2 of the guerrillas must have fallen, for ferocious shrieks of agony followed. Wells could endure no more. There stood before him his brave friend William Nettleton, hunted by a dozen fiends who must soon overpower him if aid was not quickly given. He started backward for a couple of rods, then rushed with almost flying swiftness up to the gully and bounded over its sharply cut edge. For a moment his desperate leap arrested all attention. Nettleton deemed it a new adversary coming upon him from an unexpected quarter, and turned, knife in hand, to close in with his antagonist. What was his astonishment to welcome Lieutenant Wells into his arms! What a shout followed! The guerrillas quickly sought cover, not knowing how many others might be lurking on the opposite side of the ravine to give them a bloody welcome. "Wells, by the jumping jingo! Where did you come from, and where is you going to go? Give us your hand and lend us your revolver. Ah, got 2 of 'em, hooray! Down on your knees, quicker'n lightning, for the women murderers are after us. Sharp!" Down the 2 men fell, just in time to escape a volley from the carbines of a squad of the murderers. With the dexterity of a squirrel, Nettleton rushed forward to a friendly tree, and fired quickly 3 shots from the revolver. It was a surprise to the enemy, for 2 of their number fell, so true had the aim been. The squad retreated to reload, but Nettleton had no idea of permitting that, and was about to press his advantage, when a powerfully built rebel came rushing upon him, knife in hand, from the right side of the tree, unseen by the undaunted man until it was too late for the use of his firearm. In a moment they were clasped in the death struggle. 3 or 4 of the guerrillas rushed to the spot, only to be shot down by Wells' deliberate aim. No more appeared, and the 2 combatants were left for their fearful work. Each had seized the knife hand of the other. Then followed the strain of muscle for the mastery. The guerrilla, counting upon his tremendous strength, doubtless hoped for an easy victory, but in that ungaining form he found a bundle of nerves tough as whalebone, a human frame elastic as Indian rubber, but as invincible as steel. Down toward the gully the combatants pressed. In vain did the rebel try to force his antagonist to the earth. The supple form of Nettleton bent under the adversary's pressure, but his frame at length rebounded with a force which bore the guerrilla to his knees. He drew the Federal down with him, and on their knees the frightful combat was continued. Wells would have advanced from his concealment to the rescue, but knew that a rebel carbine would surely bring him down, and thus place it out of his power to aid his friend at all. Slowly toward the chasm the men worked their way, struggling like 2 serpents striving for the death triumph. It was an exciting but appalling spectacle, which the sudden roar of firearms on the left did not serve to arrest. A shout followed, which Wells recognized as that of his own men, who must have discovered a crossing below, and have come upon the band of cutthroats unawares. There was a sudden scattering of those concealed in the immediate vicinity of the hand-to-hand contest, but one villain rushed from his cover upon the writhing forms of the bleeding men, with the design of dispatching the unconquered Federal. Wells was upon him like a tiger, and in a moment cut him down with his sword. Hinton beheld the stroke, and came rushing up to the spot just in time to behold the struggling men go over the gully's bank together. The 2 officers hurried to the bank. Some 20 feet below they could distinguish the forms of the combatants, both apparently lifeless. Without a moment's hesitancy, Wells dropped from the brink and fell crashing through the dense jungle lining the water's edge to the bed of the stream. He was stunned but not injured, and arose to his feet to find Nettleton in a sitting posture. Beside him lay the big gorilla, silent in death. "I'll be danged if that wasn't the ugliest cuss I've ever tussled with. Breeches Holt, back Holt, or rough and tumble." This was his first ejaculation. "Are you injured?" anxiously inquired Wells. "Well, let's take a reconnoissance. There's a hole in this arm that spilled the only good coat I've ever had, dang it. There's a rip, too, in the collar, where the critter's knife tried to cut my windpipe. He did scratch me there, I believe," he said, fingering his neck, down which the blood flowed freely. "By Gemini, if I hadn't lost a finger," he added, suddenly holding up his hand. "Now, it's too bad, if it's on the left hand. I rather think the Reb got a mouthful when he chewed that off." And thus he would have continued for another 10 minutes had not shouts from above aroused him. "Who's come?" he asked. "Hinton and the battalion." "Glory! And have the Rebs been caught in a trap?" "I don't know how many, but from the shouts and shouts I don't think many will be permitted to escape." "All right, now just give us a lift to see if my shanks is all right. There, that's the juniper. Just look at my back and see if you find any holes that want plugging." No holes were found, and the good-natured fellow came out of the combat with only flesh wounds, save the loss of one finger from the left hand, which the gorilla had bitten off. Nettleton was much exhausted, and was finally drawn up out of the gully with no little difficulty, when the men set up a shout which made the hills ring. "There, boys, that'll pay for the bruises. And now I guess you'll have to do me another favor. Just rub my shanks and the hinges in my back with a little whiskey, if you can spare it." In a moment, a dozen pocket flasks were produced, and willing hands gave him a good rubbing, which gave his limbs new strength. It was evident that his muscles had been severely overtasked, for he was languid and incapable of exertion. Nettleton now narrated the particular of his and Fall Leaf's adventures. Soon the troops were out on the search for Captain Hayward, while, assisted by a couple of comrades, the wounded hero of the hour made his way down to the cabin of old Madge. The old creature received him kindly, and at once bestirred herself to make him strong again. The air was soon odoriferous with the smell of distilling herbs. A prolonged shout, ere long, came rolling down the hill. Nettleton was aroused from a sleep into which he had fallen. His two comrades at once hurried out to ascertain its cause. Old Madge paused in her toil and said, "The captain's found, I suppose?" "Hooray!" yelled the invalid, now an invalid no longer. Springing from his bed, he rushed out, and away he went up the hill in the direction of the still continuing noise. His companions, astonished at his sudden recovery, followed, and all were soon lost to sight. Harry Hayward was indeed found, and the cavalcade, bearing him on a rude litter, after a half-hour's time, made its appearance coming down the mountain. Nettleton was at his side, crying like a baby. Wells held the sick man's hand, while his face, still expressing anxiety, beamed with joy. Hayward was discovered hidden in a quiet, cool nook, where he lay in a very exhausted condition. He had, in this fevered delirium, broken away from Madge's custody, but no sooner was he out in the cool shade of the trees and rocks than his mind became clear and composed. Weak and ill as he was, he still had strength to seek a place of safety from pursuit, should it be attempted, as he supposed it would be. At nightfall he had determined to seek out some respectable-looking farmhouse, and on the morrow to cast himself upon the mercy of strangers, knowing that even though that stranger might be a foe, he could not be more inhuman than men wearing the uniform of Confederate officers. But the sufferer was spared further efforts. The shouts and reports of firearms Hayward distinctly heard, and at once surmised that a Union force was at hand. When the men scattered in squads for the search through the mountain, the captain beheld one of the parties passing before his hiding place. It was his moment of deliverance. He stepped out before the astonished soldiers, who, not recognizing the apparition, did not at once welcome him. "My men, don't you know me?" "Captain Hayward!" they shouted, as they rushed upon him and clasped him in their arms. He was borne toward Madge's cabin, to be welcomed on the way by the gathering men. Wells now appeared. The joy of that meeting can be surmised. The welkin was made to the ring with the glad notes of the jubilant soldiers. These notes it was which aroused the sleeper in the cabin, and when at length he appeared, struggling wearily up the hill, the cavalcade paused to permit the overjoyed parties a few minutes of undisturbed greeting. Nettleton was not even talkative, a circumstance indicative of the depth of his feeling, and it was not until the captain was fully domiciled in the cabin that he could even consent to talk of the past and its painful incidents. He then narrated the events of Walker's plot, as we have here recorded them, ending with the tragedy of the mill. It was a revelation of intense but most painful interest to the sick man, but he bore the affliction of his sister's loss with great resolution, sustained by the conviction that he who doth all things well would not permit the evil one to triumph. End of chapter 12. Chapter 13 of Prisoner of the Mill. This is the LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Christian Bilke. Prisoner of the Mill by Harry Hazelton. Chapter 13. The Cave and the Contest for Life. After 2 days spent in the cabin, Nettleton became excessively uneasy. From something which had transpired, he conceived that old Madge knew more of Walker's whereabouts than she had yet confessed. This conviction, once formed, was but the prelude to action. Without informing any one of his purpose, he followed the old woman into the woods, whither she went in pursuit of her medicaments, having in his hand a stout rope. In a wild, retired spot, he confronted her. "Look here, old critter, you're closed-mouthed, when it would be better for your health to talk a little. Now ye just tell me where Captain Walker has taken Miss Mamie. Talk straight, and not a gap in the fence." "I don't know where he has gone," she answered rather evasively. "That is, you are a natural-born know-nothing. Well, it will assist your memory, perhaps, to stretch your neck a little. Just to take the kinks out, you know. So pass your shock-a-toe into this air noose while I pull you up on that limb." And suiting the action to the word, he flung the noose dexterously over her head. She was taken by surprise, and trembling in every limb, asked, "Would you hang me?" "Sartin as there's a tree and here's a rope." "I don't know where Walker is, but I think he has a place of refuge down the river near the ghost swamp. There's a cave in the river's bank opposite of the swamp, where I know his confederates occasionally secret themselves. He may have gone there, but as he has been gone over 2 days, I don't see why I should be there now. It's my opinion, however, that Miss Mamie, as you call her, is there, as it is the best place to keep her." "Ah, thank you, old Miss Crowsfoot. There's something more on your mind, isn't there?" Madge looked at him inquiringly. "I know all about your friend's visit, so do you just play your cards right, or I'll catch you niggin'." This allusion to her friend startled the old woman. "He was no friend of mine. He came along on his own account, and I only gave him bread, as I will give anyone who is hungry." "All right, only what did he tell you?" She hesitated. Nettleton gave the rope a twitch and looked up at the limb. The hint was enough. "The man said he was up from below on a scout. He was anxious to know what I knew about the voice of a woman which he said he had heard all along the river. He heard it distinctly as he passed the road along the river by the ghost swamp. Others had heard it, and he believed that I could tell him something as to its meaning. I told him it was a sign that he was singled out for death, that every person who heard it was called, and he might, therefore, make up his mind that his time was come. With that he left. I did not inform him of who was in my cabin, nor anything about what had happened here. So I hope you will let me go, and frighten me no more." Nettleton slowly lifted the noose from her neck, and, without another word, walked back to the cabin. He called out Lieutenant Wells, who was then watching at the captain's bedside, and the two friends held a long consultation together, which ended by an order for a guard of 20 to be ready for a night expedition. By 10 o'clock all were in readiness and on their way, taking the river path downstream. Wells was in command. Nettleton acted as a scout and guide.
All night long they pressed on, and daylight found them on the hills opposite the spot indicated by Madge as the locality of the cave in the bank. Asking Wells for his field glass, Nettleton carefully scrutinized the river bank opposite. After a short survey, he suddenly exclaimed, "The Injun is sure as Sacramento!" "What did you say?" inquired Wells. "Fall leaf. See him? There he lays, and there is the cave. I'm blessed if I know what to make of it. I suppose, of course, that redskin was roasted alive in the mill. But there he is, and here I goes." So saying, down he dashed into the river and forded its waters rapidly. Once on the opposite side, he hurried up the bank and soon reached the ledge across which the Indian was lying. The poor fellow was but half conscious from over-fatigue and hunger, yet his eyes were fixed with cat-like vigilance upon the aperture of the cave, while his hand still firmly clasped the knife upon which he relied to do his deadly work. Nettleton approached him silently and touched his feet. At once the Indian looked behind him. "Give Fall Leaf drink, quick!" was his hurried whisper, while the finger on his lip indicated silence. Nettleton comprehended at a glance, passing his canteen and knapsack to Fall Leaf. He beheld the Indian drink and eat with satisfaction. Not a word passed between them. "Good! Fall Leaf much weak, now strong again," he whispered. "Where's Miss Mamie?" The Indian pointed to the cavern. "Walker too?" Fall Leaf nodded, and scowled so fiercely that Nettleton perceived the savage wanted no interference in his case. "Shan't I do the job for you?" "No, Fall Leaf mad. Me kill him. You go away." "That's the talk, Injun. You shall have your man, but Jerusalem, don't I ache to get my paws on him." A noise was now heard in the cave. It was Walker's voice. "I'll not permit you to sing, I again tell you. If those men crossing the river are Union soldiers, you shall not betray our whereabouts, and if Fall Leaf moves, I'll shoot him." "Bah, you ornery cuss, I'm on your track now," shouted Nettleton. "William! Dear William!" cried the captive woman, recognizing his voice. "Here," he responded, "and so chock full of the devil that if I don't get rid of it soon it will spile me. Walker, you dirty beast, dare you fight me?" he yelled. "I dare fight any decent antagonist, but don't care to dirty my hands with you," was the reply. "Oh, you nasty, miserable, thieving woman-stealer, man-assassinator! I'll cook your breakfast for you, but Fall Leaf shall eat it. He'll dirty his hands with you." "I defy you and all your crew," growled the rebel. "If one of you dares to show your head, you are a dead man." "Blast your pitcher, here's a head, shoot it!" cried Nettleton, sticking his head out in a manner to dare Walker's fire. The scoundrel was prepared, and discharged his gun in an instant. Its report had not ceased its echo ere Fall Leaf, with a bound like a panther, dropped before the entrance of the hole. Walker stood there with knife in hand to foil any such attempt to storm his castle. A quick blow with his foot sent the Indian headlong over the ledge. "Try that on me!" roared Nettleton, who, uninjured by the ball from Walker's musket, was at the Indian's heels. No sooner said than done, and Nettleton received an unexpected blow in the bowels from the rebel's heavy boot, which sent him almost instantly over the edge after Fall Leaf. That was the propitious moment for escape. Without a word to his captive, he passed out upon the ledge, and had nearly reached his terminus when Lieutenant Wells, followed by his men, confronted the desperate man. Drawing his revolver, Wells cried, "Surrender, or you're a dead man." "I will never surrender to you," was the fierce reply, as the now cornered desperado began slowly to retire backward to regain his stronghold. He had retreated fully halfway to the entrance when his heel caught on the rough floor of the ledge, and his balance was lost. For a moment he sought to regain his foothold, but, finding it gone, he gave a shout and leapt over the precipice. The soldier looked over the ledge and saw his form disappear in the trees beneath. Wells did not wait, but rushed to the cavern mouth. "Miss Mamie!" A form darkened the passage, and within stood Miss Hayward, smiling and blushing as if just caught at her toilet. With a cry of joy, Wells entered and clasped her to his bosom. "Safe and uninjured! Thank God! Thank God!" answered the maiden. "Safe and restored, and, thank God, your brother," too is recovered and is now in our hands doing well. Then I am happy indeed, she could only reply while tears of joy checked further utterance. Wells had entirely forgotten Walker in his moment of sweet communion with his restored friend, but a shout which came up from the depths below recalled him to duty. It was a wild Indian war whoop, then a succession of ejaculations which the men could plainly distinguish. "Go in, Injun! Walk along, Walker, you darn skunk, you! There, that's a good un, Injun! Now another in the corn rib! There he goes! Hooray for the Injun!" All well knew the meaning of this, and a number of the men hastened to the base of the cliff by a long roundabout path, which came up from the river to the ford below. They arrived to find Walker slain and Fall Leaf badly cut in the face, arms, and shoulder, but no serious wounds on the body. Nettleton stood over his friend, bathing his wounds in the clear water of the river. "Injun's done for the cutthroat, sure. It was mean to shut me out, but it was his game, 'cause he treated. I'd give all I'll ever be worth." "Would you give Sally?" put in one of the men. "Dang Sally! No! Dang my skin, that is. Dang me if I wouldn't give my commission, boys. That's it! Give my commission to have had the satisfaction of doing Fall Leaf's work." Nettleton looked savagely at the body of the dead man, seeming to feel that he had made a personal sacrifice in permitting the Indian to kill his enemy. It would appear that both Fall Leaf and Nettleton, when kicked off the ledge, fell at its foot without injury, as the base was banked up to a considerable distance with the decayed and water-soaked debris of the bank, down which they had rolled into the water. They had recovered and stepped out into the stream to look up to the ledge, when they beheld Wells and Walker confronted. In a moment the rebel staggered and went bounding off the ledge, and, like his two antagonists, came tumbling and sliding down the declivity, landing at the water's brink upon his feet. There he was received by the Indian, with the wild whoop which startled those above. Nettleton, in honor bound not to interfere, stood by while the two fierce foes closed in deadly conflict. Walker, though a resolute and strong man, was not equal in a knife fight to the supple savage. After a few passes, Fall Leaf buried his knife in the rebel's bosom. Thus closed the career of a bad man, bad by nature, but rendered doubly bad by the cause which he espoused. To serve that cause he had to betray his country, desert his friends, stifle the voice of conscience, perjure his honor, become a hypocrite and a deceiver. After that, all other degrees of crime were easy. Wells followed the men at length, and appeared on the spot. He was shocked at the sight before him, but conceded its justice. His own wish was to have secured Walker for trial and punishment according to military law, yet it must be acknowledged that, many times, he felt like wreaking condign personal vengeance on the head of the man who had wrought so successfully in crime. He ordered the body to be buried in the debris at the foot of the cliff, and there repose today, with no monument save the cave above, which will long remain as a witness to the traitor's crime and traitor's doom. End of chapter 13.
Chapter 14 of Prisoner of Mill. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Brianna. From Prisoner of Mill by Harry Hazelton. Chapter 14. The Bodyguard's Sickness and Cure. Slowly the party wended its way back to the mill. Just at nightfall it came in sight of the lonely hut which covered the treasure so dear to the heart of the rescued maiden. How her eager arms longed to clasp her brother's form to her bosom, how her ears longed for the sound of his voice. The wings of the swallow would have been slow for her pining soul, but the moment of reunion came at last. The dead was made alive, the lost restored. Miss Hayward, gallanted by Wells, pressed on ahead of the troop, and their panting steeds at length stood riderless before the cabin door, for the riders had disappeared within. The meeting of brother and sister was one of mingled pleasure and pain. Both had suffered so much that to think of it was pain. Captain Hayward was greatly emaciated. Loss of blood, fever, hunger, and exposure would have ended a life less tenacious than his. But despite his suffering, the presence of friends, the rescue of his sister, the anticipated happiness of her union with the man who had proven himself so well worthy of her, all conspired to give an elasticity to his spirits more potent than the infusions of herbs prepared by the not unskilled hands of old Madge, who, from an enemy, had by the force of couldn't help herself, as Nettleton declared, become a useful instrument at a critical moment. And what about Nettleton? All day long after the morning's experience at the cave, he had plodded on soberly, somewhat absorbed in his own reflections. Behind him sat Forebodings, who from his weak state was well content to ride. The Indian, though perfectly silent and apparently indifferent to all things, now that his work was done, still was inwardly pleased at the rescue of the thought of the pleasure in store for the captain, of whose safety he had been informed by Nettleton, and he was quite willing to go into camp for a few days before putting out again on his endless scouts. "Need'll be sick?" he at length asked his companion. "Not by a darn sight, Injun. Need'll be sick, Forebodings knows it. You be danged to darnation, you red onion head of Delaware," was the somewhat excited answer, as he turned into the saddle and stared the Indian in the face. Forebodings smiled. "Needle want physic. Miss Long give Needle physic," he obstinately persisted. "Now look here, Miss Injun, if you want to fight, just you say so. I'll be catawumpsed if I don't lick your wuss nigger what's got a mad woman after him. Forebodings no want to fight Needle. Maybe whip Needle. Then what Miss Long say? Yo-ho, you mean sneaking son of a brickling. If you don't stop that clapper in your head, I'll be switched if I don't put a peg through it." And he set his face firmly to the front, rolled his horse severely with his spurs, and dashed ahead at a speed quite uncomfortable to the provoking Delaware. When the cavalcade reached the cabin, Nettleton did not obtrude himself upon the party within. For an hour or more they were alone. At length Hayward asked, "Where is my brave preserver? Why is he not here to enjoy our happiness? And Forebodings too. I would thank him as he deserves, the noble and devoted savage." Search was made. Forebodings was found out by the campfire, undergoing the process of lotion cure for his wounds, at the hands of Madge, who was carefully washing the bruised and cut flesh of the red man. All inquiries for Nettleton were fruitless. He was not to be found. It was ascertained at length that his horse also was gone. Many were the surmises as to the cause of his absence, and fears were expressed for his safety. Morning came, and the party, now rejoined by the entire battalion, prepared to move, by easy stage, from the valley toward the line of march pursued by the retreating army. Captain Hayward was made quite comfortable in a camp wagon, with his sister for companion and nurse. Forebodings pushed out far ahead to scout and secure the command from surprise. Adjutant Hilton and Wells were tireless in their devotion to the comfort and safety of their charge. It was a pleasant journey. that week of slow progress toward Tipton. At length, however, the village hove in sight. The white tents dotting the hills and valleys proved that the division was there. While yet a long way off, a party of horsemen accompanied by ladies was seen dashing off at full speed toward the spot where the battalion had halted for its noon bivouac. Wells caught his sight of the party, and with his glass made out the gaunt form of Nettleton far in advance. Behind him, on the same horse, rode a female, whose identity the officer could not fix. Nearer and nearer the horsemen came, until after an exciting race they dashed into the camp, Nettleton and Sally Long. They were received with a wild hurrah from the entire troop, and none shouted louder than Nettleton himself. "Hooray, hooray, by the eternal jingo!" he cried, leaping from the horse, and leaving Miss Sally sitting there alone, before the eyes of the joyous and excited troops. Making his way to the captain's marquee, as the man had named the wagon, he was welcomed by Hayward in a manner which quickly turned his servant's joy to mourning, for the embrace of real affection bestowed quite upset Nettleton's confidence. "I'm nothing but a great darned skunk, anyhow," he exclaimed as, breaking away from the captain's embrace, he started for his horse and the neglected Sally. "Nettle be sick!" He turned to behold Fall leaf gazing upon him in mock compassion. "Not by a danged sight, you infernal lump of glory!" he now shouted, as, clasping the Indian in his arms, gave the red man a hug which brought forth a grunt. "Nettle make Fall leaf sick. Guess Nettle got full of Miss Sally now." "Yes, sir, and there she is in all her glory," was the rejoinder, as the boy guard pointed in the evident pride to the smiling woman. "Gentlemen of the jury, let me present to you my wife, the most blissful woman you ever saw." "Your wife!" exclaimed a dozen voices at once. "Yes, my wife hitched to me tighter's a handle to the jug by Chaplain Disbrow 2 days ago, by the eternal jingo." This was enough for the man. All order gave way before the hilarious uproar which followed. They pressed around Sally to offer their congratulations, which the delighted wife received with great good nature and dignity, still sitting where she had been left, behind the saddle on the horse. At this moment the party first described rode up. It was composed of Mrs. Hinton, Miss Morton, and a number of friends eager to welcome the captain and his sister, of whose fortunes Nettleton had most unexpectedly, 3 days before, brought the news to camp. That it was a joyful meeting may well be assumed. Does not our story here end? To say that Miss Mamie Hayward soon became Mrs. Wells, in the presence of the whole division, that a grand gala day followed, is but half the truth, however, for at the same time another bridegroom was there in the form of the pale but happy Captain Henry Hayward, who took to be his comforter and his much-needed nurse the woman who loved him most truly, Miss Nettie Morton. It was indeed a most happy consummation of a drama which promised at one time to end only in sorrow and broken hearts. Now the least happy of all that wrong, nor the least noted, was Nettleton, the captain's bodyguard. End of chapter 14. End of Prisoner of the Mill by Harry Hazelton.